A pleasant good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I'm Vince D'Addario. That guy over there, that's Brian Driscoll, and we're back. We're back in the saddle, ready to talk about some Notre Dame football. Thanks for bearing with us this afternoon. Appreciate that. Your patience is very appreciated. Thank you. And we're going to have some fun today. We are going to talk about some underrated Notre Dame players. And by underrated, it's guys we don't talk about maybe as much as some other guys who have the potential of being an impact player on the team, whether that's a rotational guy, whether that's a guy that's already penciled in to be a starter. Some of those guys are on here as well. But guys that maybe aren't getting the headlines when we think about, impact players and, things of that nature. And so we're going to talk offense, defense, special teams. And then, of course, we're going to jump into, this is Thursday. And so our final segment will be breaking down one of the Power Four conferences. And today, that conference is the Big Ten. And it's a controversial topic when you're talking about Notre Dame. So I hope we don't get those guys in the chat today. But we are going to break down the 2024 version of the Big Ten, which, as everybody is well aware, has swollen to 18 teams and is going to be an interesting conference this year. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I will say that. But before we get to that conversation, we get to have this conversation. And that conversation is underrated standouts for the University of Notre Dame. And I just want to make sure that we understand what type of player we are talking about here. It is role players that may be starters, but are underrated and don't get as much attention, but how they are very important to the team. Does that kind of summarize it, Brian, as far as the players we're going to talk about today? Okay. All right. Got the thumbs up, so that's a good sign. So let's just jump right in. We know we start offense first, folks. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. That's how we roll. We're offensive guys. And so we talk offense first. And so let's just jump right in. And what we're going to do is we're going to start at the running back position. And a lot of love goes to Jeremiah Love for good reason, because he is going to be a very, very important piece to what Notre Dame is doing. But we always say it's a 1A and a 1B situation at running back. But the 1B tends to not get talked about very much. And, of course, that's Jadarian Price. And so we want to talk about what he brings to the table and his impact on this team, Brian.
Yeah, I'm totally fine. Like you said, I'm totally fine with the Jeremiah Love talk. I mean, he's he
deserves it.
He's going to be a stud. We talked about him yesterday. My concern when it comes to the Notre Dame fans, and thank goodness the Notre Dame coaches don't seem to feel this way, but the Notre Dame fans do, that we always get into this thing where it's like you only have enough room in your heart for like one player per position, right? Like that's where it comes down to. It's like 2 years ago, we had all these people that like, I don't like all Logan Diggs, and they need to play him less and go with Aldridge. I'm like, no, they're doing exactly what they need to do, and these are both really good players. But you'd get this Team Audric, Team Logan split that was going on that was odd and unnecessary because they're both really good. And the same thing I believe is happening here, where because people love Jeremiah Love, it's like, well, do this with him, and Jadarian Price can just come in and sub him. No, they both need to play a ton. And Jeremiah Love is 6'1", 206 pounds. He is not a guy that you want playing 25, getting 20 plus carries a game, for 16 games. Right. And there's just no reason not to have a kid who's really talented coming in. And I would argue, as far as just pure natural runners, just running the football, not all the other stuff, that Jadarian Price is their best pure runner on the roster.
Yeah.
And I feel like the conversation with him is more about just as it's kind of like, let's just dismiss him. And, for whatever reason, he wasn't ranked as high as Jeremiah was coming out of high school, whatever the reason is. It's almost like he's dismissed as like an afterthought, a role player, where in reality, if Jadarian Price was Notre Dame's own, like we talked about yesterday, if Jeremiah Love was Notre Dame's top running back, he'd be 1,000-yard rusher and 300-400 yards receiving, and no doubt about it. Well, if Jadarian Price was Notre Dame's leading, only primary ball carrier, he'd also be a 1,200-yard rusher.
Right.
Like we had somebody, we get these in the buy, sell, hold. So, some people talk about Jeremiah Love and what he's going to do, and then other people are going to talk about what Jadarian Price is going to do. So there are some that I think recognize it, but I think a lot of the fan base is kind of getting into that whole, this is my guy thing, and I don't have enough room in my heart for two guys. The reality is Notre Dame has two very dynamic running backs.
Yeah.
And if you don't have Jadarian Price balling out, then there's less that you can do with Jeremiah Love. And
correct.
Not only is Jadarian really good, and I want to talk about that first, Vince, but him being good and healthy also allows you to use Jeremiah Love in a lot of different ways. But to begin, it's just like, this kid has a chance to be an impact running back, like a 1,000+ yard, 6+ yard per carry guy that showed last year. The one thing Jadarian did show last year, he's a home run hitter. And there's no doubt about it. First carry of the season goes for a touchdown. He has a 40+ yard touchdown reception. And of course, the
kick return
for a touchdown against USC, which broke that. I mean, USC was just starting to claw back, Vince. It was 31-20. Who knows? You get a stop there. They can make it a one-score game. Jadarian says, nah, not today.
Let me ask you a question. Like, kind of jumping into the DeLorean, and we're going to go back in time here a little bit. Remember when Mr. Price was a true freshman, his first year on campus, and we're talking fall camp and all of these things, and we had the privilege of watching him during some of fall camp, I do believe. I don't think I'm getting that mixed up with spring camp, but fall camp.
It was spring.
Was it spring?
Year,
okay, yeah.
Because he got hurt in the summer.
Okay,
so
thank
it was
you.
Spring.
So it was spring.
We were outside a lot more. That's why you were thinking it was fall camp. We were actually outside a little bit during that.
It runs together. I'll be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, it was
okay.
It was spring practice.
But when he was a true freshman and he was on the field in the spring, there was talk that he was going to be the number one back as a true freshman. And then he gets hurt and he's out for the entire season. And honestly, that injury kind of lingered into the next season as well, to a degree, from an explosiveness standpoint and things of that nature, to like the beginning, to spring of the following year and then into fall. And he wasn't quite what he was when he first got on campus and things like that. And so do you think that from a fan's perspective, because we got to see what he was doing in the spring, fans didn't get to see that, obviously, right? And so we saw how explosive he was, and we saw what he was doing and how he was kind of taking over that room and, all of these different things. And then he gets hurt. So he's gone for the whole season. Then he comes back and he's not the most explosive when he first gets back. And you've got obviously Audric Estime and, all of the things that actually went down. Do you think he just kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit because of that injury?
Maybe.
From a fan perspective, you know what I'm saying?
Maybe. But like my counter to that would be, but like he carried the ball early against Navy and took it to the house. Right. I mean, so it's like, okay, maybe you forgot about him, but you should have not forgot about him then. I mean, look,
right.
Vince, I was told this by a Notre Dame football coach, like just flat out told me this, and he was not being hyperbolic. He goes, if he said this was before Jadarian got hurt. This is like, not like this was at the end of spring. He goes, look, man, he goes, he might be our starting running back this year. I mean, and then, summer workouts start and then he gets hurt and it's like, dude, he was definitely on pace to be our starting running back.
Yeah.
And that's how good he was that first spring. And Notre Dame rightly, and Dylan McCullough's talked about this, and Jadarian's talked about this spring. They rightly said, hey, we're going to pull back the reins a little bit during the season. Now, pull back the reins isn't just, we've said this, it's not just about limiting your work in games. Because if you're getting 1 million reps during the week and, okay, yeah, I'm getting 15 less reps in the game, that's not removing the workload. It's also taking some off in the week of practice. And so that was obviously something Notre Dame was intended to do. And they could get away with it because they had Jeremiah Love, they had Jabron Payne, they had Devin Ford, and they had Jadarian. But I just feel like, okay, if he was somebody you overlooked going into the season, that's fair. But I feel like he definitely did enough last season to make you say, hey, look, we shouldn't be overlooking this guy.
Agreed.
And not just the fan base, but also externally. You hear all this talk about Jeremiah Love, but you don't hear any talk about Jadarian Price. And I think Jadarian Price is poised for a really big year. And because again, I'm not team Jadarian. I'm team those running backs are dudes. You know,
team Notre Dame, like your team, like
whoever,
right?
Whoever,
don't care who it is.
It's just, you could think one, and what that doesn't mean you can't think one guy's better than the other. That's totally fair. I'm completely fine with that. It's getting into that Audric Logan nonsense from 2022, where when Logan left, people are like, good, They're going to be fine without him. I'm like, would they be still
there was
better
a lot of
with
that.
him?
There was a lot of that, actually.
Yeah, they're going to be fine. But wouldn't they be even better if they also had him last year? And that stuff just drives me nuts. Because, like, look, okay, you like Audric Moore. Fine. I never told anyone not to like Audric Moore.
Right.
But it's just like, okay, and I just don't want that to be what happens at running back. Because Jadarian Price is a dude. Jadarian Price would start we're going over the Big Ten, and I'm like, there's most of the teams in this league, he'd start at running back for most of the teams in this league. Most of the teams on Notre Dame's schedule, he'd probably start at running back. He's a dude.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what you look at what they did. Lance Taylor got Jadarian Price, and then what Dylan McCullough has done since then. That's why we're so excited about this backfield, because it's not just Jeremiah Love.
Correct.
It's Jadarian Price. And it's important, too, because what if Jeremiah gets banged up? Well, now you're okay still. And what if Jadarian gets banged up? Well, you're okay still because you have the other. And that's where it's just he's a very talented player, and he can do a little bit more out of the backfield than maybe we think he can. But he's more of a traditional running back.
Yeah.
Unlike Jeremiah, who could literally line up in the slot and do some things. But you go back and watch Jadarian's high school film; he's catching seam routes, like backside seam routes out of trips. He can catch the football. You're just not going to – he's just 5'10". So you're not going to necessarily want to get him in some of those matchups running vertical routes like he did in high school. But as a weapon out of the backfield, you're going to want to get him the football as in many spots as you can. And if he's as good as we think, Vince, this is what ties into the final point. Now you can do so much more with Jeremiah Love, because these two kids complement each other, not just as a rotation, but in ways where you can play them together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's going to be the fun part. I do hope that we see more two-back sets and motions and, moving these guys around. And you can still leave Jeremiah Love in the backfield and motion Jadarian Price out to a slot and play with the defense, play with their minds a little bit. You know what I mean? And I can tell you right now that one will block for the other without any issues. You know what I mean? If they're in a two-back set, if they're just going to run power lead, okay, let's go. Like they're very unselfish kids, and I think that they're very team-oriented, which I love. And I would put, this Notre Dame backfield up against anybody from a 1-2 punch standpoint. We say 1A, 1B, 1-2, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. Whichever order you want to put them in, you take number 1, number 2, put them up against any number 1, number 2 in the country. Maybe we don't have the best number 1. Maybe we don't have the best number 2, but you put them together, and I think you're into a pretty healthy debate as to where Notre Dame stands in that pecking order. And so I love Mr. Price. I think that he's going to be really, really, really good. And I think it's not going to take very long for fans and national media to get on board with how good he actually is. And look, like you said, Jeremiah Love deserves all the praise that he's getting, all the flowers, right? He absolutely deserves all of that. But don't forget about the other guy, because if you do, he's going to hurt you. And it's going to be fun to watch.
I'm actually all for opponents forgetting about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that's who you were talking about.
Yes.
And because it's one of those things, Vince, and when you add in the Riley Leonard effect as well, it's like, okay, if they're in 21 personnel and they're running read zone with Jeremiah Love running some backside RPO, you're that backside defender. Okay, do I squeeze on the inside zone? Do I have to get my eyes on the quarterback for read zone? Am I worried about Jeremiah Love on the RPO? That's putting him in a lot of problems, A lot of binds.
Yes.
And when you have a guy like Jadarian Price, who is a legitimate home run hitter at that position, Vince, it makes a huge impact. Yeah. So I expect this to be just a really fun, dynamic, impactful 1-2 punch. And that's my only thing is like, look, you should think Jeremiah Love has a chance to be a stud, because he does.
Yeah.
But so does Jadarian, and that's the great thing for both things to be duo.
It's okay for both things to be true. You know what I mean? Like,
they are.
That's okay. Right. And it's a great place to be. It's a great position.
Great place to be. And again, it helps keep Jeremiah Love fresh, because what are we talking about here, Vince? We're talking about, and it's not just us. Bill Bender at the Sporting News put his college football playoff predictions out today, and he had Notre Dame in the semifinals. That means they're playing 15 games. You really want a 6'1", 206-pound sophomore in college who's still a teenager to be the bulk carrier for 15 games and expect him to be fresh when you get to the semifinals? No. You want to make sure that you're keeping him fresh. Yeah. I would rather have Jeremiah, at 12 to 13 touches a game and fresh for 15 games than for him to be a 20-plus touch per game guy for most of the season. And now all of a sudden he's worn down to get the postseason.
Sure.
Because the thing about both of these guys, Vince, which is great, and this is where I think – I didn't even think about this, but it just popped in my head. This is where I think that they are a more impactful duo than Audric or Logan. Because the one thing about Audric and Logan is they were very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And they did the same things. They weren't really guys that complemented each other. They were just, hey, no matter who you're putting in the game, we're hammering you with duo and inside zone and whatever. The thing about these two guys, Vince, is – they can do more with less. Like Audric and Logan were both volume players. They're better the more volume they get. Yes. And actually, Logan was better with less volume. Audric was especially a volume guy. The more touches he got, the more impactful he was. Go look at the Ohio. That's why I thought they made such a big mistake in the Ohio State game in the fourth quarter, because he was starting to hit his groove, and they were starting to lean on them and start to really wear Ohio State down. And then they went away from it, drive over. JT makes huge plays, and all of a sudden Ohio State's got the ball back with a chance to win. I mean, if you could have just got one more first down, that might be a ball game. But you went away from your horse. And that's my thing is, if they're going to beat you, make them beat you stopping what you do best.
Yes.
They didn't do that. But the nice thing about these two guys is neither of these guys are necessarily bulk guys. Now, can they both handle bulk? Sure. I mean, if there's a game where you got to ride Jeremiah Love for 20-plus touches, okay. If you got to do that to beat Florida State, then ride him for 20 touches. If you got to ride Jadarian for 20 touches to beat USC on the road at the end of the year, okay, cool, ride him. Right? But, for most of the year, the fact that both of these guys complement each other so well, but the fact that they can do as much with 10 touches. Like Jeremiah Love can do as much with 10 touches as Logan Diggs could do with 18.
Yeah.
That's not a knock on Logan. They're just different players.
Right.
And I mean, there's things Logan could do that you don't necessarily want to ask Jeremiah to do a ton. But that's the thing I like too, Vince, is it makes him an even better compliment because you don't have to force the ball to one guy to quote unquote get him hot. And that's something that makes this a real dynamic duo.
So let's move to another position. And as I was looking at the topic before I started looking at names specifically, I was like, okay, there has to be a wide receiver on here somewhere. Like we've got to come up with a wide receiver. And then I look at your list and it says Jaden Thomas. And I was like, wait, you know what? That's a really good choice, because I think that he has also kind of, because of his injury history, I think he has kind of fallen out of the lexicon a little bit of wide receivers that we talk about, right? I mean, he was injured most of the spring. He was in and out of the lineup last year. I mean, he has not put together a full season of being healthy, to my recollection. I'm sure you can prove me wrong, but his injury history has prevented him from being that number one guy at Notre Dame. And he has every opportunity, every possibility from a talent standpoint to be a very productive wide receiver at Notre Dame. And if he can stay healthy, that's exactly, in my opinion, what he's going to be. I think this is a great choice because of what maybe we thought he could have been if he stayed healthy to where we are now in 2024. I think he can kind of sneak up on people a little bit at this point, which is wild to think about based on where I thought he would be by now.
What's interesting about Jaden Thomas is you could look and say, dude, he's only missed 2 games in the last 2 years. What are you talking about? He gets injured a lot. But here's the thing, Vince. It's not that he misses games. It's that he's always banged up.
Yes.
And he's limited. Like, okay, he's not playing as many reps, or he's not as effective, and he's not as fast or whatever. So it's not even that he's just –
that stat blows my mind, by the way.
Yeah. Or he'll miss parts of the offseason.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is he'll miss parts of the offseason because – really important parts of the offseason because he's injured in the spring, or he's injured in the summer, or he misses part of fall camp. And, those are the things you look at and say, it's not that he was necessarily injured a lot, meaning like missing long stretches of time. It's just his effectiveness waned, or he would miss parts of the development of the season. And then that would factor into maybe why he wasn't that good early in the season. So like he missed some of the offseason in 2022. Well, go
Yeah.
look at his numbers. He was pretty bad the first 3 games of the season. I mean, I still remember watching him on that pick 6 against Marshall. It's not a good ball by Tyler. He shouldn't have thrown it. But Jaden didn't fight for it at all. I mean,
Right.
he was completely out of sync. And you're like, this guy has no business being on the field at Notre Dame. I mean, that the way he was playing in that early in the season against Ohio State and Marshall and even Cal, like they got to get this guy out of there. And then they had a bye week. He got healthy. Logan got healthy. And then all of a sudden, Jaden goes off and starts playing a lot better. Has a really, 2 really clutch catches against North Carolina. Plays really well against BYU. You remember that phenomenal touchdown grab he had against BYU. And then he kind of disappears for the next 4 games. And then he reemerges and finishes the year on a strong note. So it's that kind of thing with Jaden. It's the inconsistency and the injuries. But the other thing is that's okay, but that's not necessarily why I think he's overlooked. I think the big reason why he's overlooked, Vince, is because he's just not a real sexy player. and while that might not be something that you think matters for a quarterback, I want some sexy players. I want some guys like Will Fullers that can stretch the field and be home run hitters. But you know who I love the most on 3rd and 5? That not sexy guy that I know is going to get open.
Exactly.
And
he's going to run he's going to run his route to the sticks.
Yes.
He's going to be exactly where you think he's going to be, so that when you're looking somebody off over here and you come back, you know exactly where he's going to be. That's not sexy, but that certainly is reliable and very important.
There's always a need for guys. I mean, Jaden's he's 4 for 50. That's just waiting to happen. And just look down 3 for 45, 4 for 51, 4 for 60, 5 for 70. That's who Jaden is.
Yes.
Could there be a game where he goes off? Yeah, sure. But he's a volume guy. He's a guy that's you look at it and say, well, he only had 4 catches for 44 yards in this game. You're like, yeah, that one was on 3rd and 4.
Exactly.
That one, got him out. They were backed up at their own 5, and he got open to move the chains there. Oh, that one was also a 3rd down conversion, and this one set him up in the red zone for a score, but somebody else did. And so, the numbers aren't sexy, but you look at it but those are 4 important catches that he made in that game.
Correct.
And we're all, after the game, we're going to be in a postgame show. Oh, did you see that great play by Chris Mitchell and Jaden Greathouse at 8 catches for 120 yards? And that's who we'll be talking about. But then as a receivers coach, you're looking back and you're watching the film, like, man, those are some money catches that boy made right there.
Continue to drive, a scoring drive that you needed in that moment, all those kinds of things. He will have those kinds of catches. I completely agree with you.
Oh, yeah. It'll be like, okay, they're playing Florida State and game's tied, final drive of the game, and Riley Leonard hits Mitchell Evans or Jaden Greathouse or Chris Mitchell for a touchdown, and we're all praising them for that touchdown grab. And you're going to look back and say, but that doesn't get there if Jaden Greathouse or Jaden Thomas doesn't make that 3rd and 5 catch when they're at their own 24.
Right. 100%. And so what you're saying is he may only have 4 catches, but maybe 3 out of the 4 of those are going to be
it's money. Yeah,
it's impactful catches in the game.
Just money. Or even something simple like he comes out, he gets open, and his first 2 grabs go for 13 yards, but it's on the first drive. And it helps the quarterback get into rhythm because he got open, and all of a sudden your quarterback starts going off. And his early – so, again, it may not look sexy, but he's just effective.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I'm not saying Jaden, so in case his mom's listening or something like that, I'm not talking about Jaden's looks. I'm talking about his style of play.
Hey, I've got there's a mother of a young man upstairs, and if I told her that her son was sexy, she'd be like, stop talking. So I totally understand.
So it's just one of those things where Vince, he's just a do your job guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are so important. They usually don't get the love that the other guys do. It's like Chris Brown was that way in 2015. Chris Brown wasn't making the big plays and having the big games. That was Will Fuller, and CJ Prosise. But Chris just did his job. And then that one game where Will was struggling against Boston College, who was it that made the big plays in that game? It was Chris Brown. You look back at the end of the year and it's like 30-some catches, 500-some yards or something like that. But at the end of but then you're like, but man, he just made this big play and he made that big play and he made this important play. And that's, that Amir Carlisle and Chris Brown both served that role for Notre Dame in 2015 to Will Fuller's, star. And they need guys like that. And
Yeah.
that's who Jaden Thomas is. I mean, and they need, that's why but that's also, Vince, why they need him to stay healthy.
Correct. Absolutely. And I also think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you played the position, but he strikes me as a very quarterback friendly wide receiver for a couple of different reasons. Number one, like you said earlier, he's going to run his route. You know where he's going to be, that kind of a thing. But he's also got a pretty big catch radius, right? You don't have to be perfect when throwing the ball to a kid like that. You know what I mean? You can be a little bit off and it's still going to become a catch. And so you can trust that when the ball's coming his way, good things are probably going to happen and you don't have to be perfect getting him the ball. I think he falls under that category as well. Do you agree?
No, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Now, what you can do as a mistake as a coach is you can take that reliability and turn it into he's our guy. He's our go-to guy. And that's the mistake I think Notre Dame made with Jaden Thomas last year. I think they tried to force Jaden into a role that is just not him.
Yeah.
And I think it hurt him at times on top of being banged up. Yeah. And so it's just like, okay, you are going to have to figure out, like, he's a complimentary player. He's a darn good complimentary player, but don't try to turn him into your go-to guy because he's a veteran and all this stuff. He is a good player, and I'd like to see them hopefully move him around a little bit this year. And so, Bo Collins has got to step up, or Dion or Micah Gilbert, a couple of those guys got to step up, and then that hopefully allows them to move him around a little bit more.
Yes. So let's stay on. Obviously, we're going to stay on the offensive side of the ball. Let's switch to another position, and let's go to tight end, Bryan. And when we talk about tight end, we generally talk about Mitchell Evans. We talk about Eli Raridan for good reason. Not a whole lot of talk about Cooper Flanagan and what he brings to the table. At least that's not the first name out of your mouth when we're talking about, potential targets and impactful players and all of those different things. But Cooper Flanagan, folks, if you weren't paying attention last year, you're going to see, I think, who Cooper Flanagan is this year. He's a kid that can block, he can catch, he can do all the different things that you need him to do. He just, I guess to borrow a word from you, I don't think he does it in a sexy manner, but he does the work that you need to do at Notre Dame as a tight end. Now, my only question about Cooper and how much time he's going to get on the field is, how often are they going to get to their third tight end? Things of that nature as far as what the offense is going to look like. But you should have no qualms about going to Cooper Flanagan in this offense. No qualms whatsoever. And with the injury history of the guys ahead of him, Cooper Flanagan better be ready to rock and roll.
That's a big part of it, Vince. Is that part right there? It's the aspect of the fact that you're gonna need to rely on him at some point in time. And even if everybody's healthy, you're gonna need to rely on him for two reasons. One is, again, it's like you're gonna want to make sure you're limiting the reps of the two guys that are there, that are ahead of him, that are injury prone. That's going to be important. And then the other part is he has a very different skill set than those two players. He complements them very well. So even if everybody's healthy, Cooper plays an important role. And, one that is they're going to need, because, like, look, are they going to do 12 and 13 personnel as much as they did last year? No, but are they going to still do it? They better. I mean, you're not using your personnel if you're not doing that.
Right.
So.
Right.
Like, I know 12, 13 personnel kind of like just strikes a nerve with some Notre Dame fans because of the over-reliance on it in the past. That's fine. That doesn't make 12 personnel a bad personnel group, especially when you're like, it kills me when Notre Dame fans are like, oh, it's too much 12 personnel. Like, you want to argue that Notre Dame's tight end and they get pissed off when Notre Dame uses multiple
more than one tight end.
Yeah. Maybe you're not really thinking this through a whole lot.
No.
But you go back and watch Alabama in 2020. They used a lot of 12 personnel, like a lot. Now, hold on a second. They used a lot. Go watch Alabama again in 2020. Go watch the SEC title game and talk to me about explosive offense never used 12 personnel. It's about how you use it. The issue was never that they used 12 personnel as much as they did. The issue was that they never incorporated the number 2 tight end into the pass game, which made it easier to defend that 12 personnel. And those are the things that are going to have to get adjusted. But look, they're going to use 12 personnel. They should use 12 personnel. And if you can have 3 guys for 2, that's great. And look, I'll tell you right now, Mike Denbrock You may say, man, Notre Dame would love to have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. And I'd say, yeah, you're right. But you know what? Mike Denbrock would have loved to have Notre Dame's tight ends on that first drive of the season last year when they got first to goal at the 1 yard line. And they're trying to have Brian Thomas be your backside tight end because they only had one healthy tight end. And then they went stuff, Florida State football.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't happen if you got Notre Dame's tight ends. You're in the end zone. You're up 7-0. Like, so those things matter. Those things matter. And all of a sudden, Florida State gets all the momentum in that game, or gets all the momentum back. And that, because like LSU was winning at halftime of that game. People forget that. They were winning at halftime. That's with them getting stuffed inside the 5-yard line twice in the first half. So you're going to want to have those guys. And Cooper Flanagan's the guy that really thrives in those type of situations because he's the best blocker. At least he was last year. Eli Raridan was a really good blocker in 2022. I think he took a little bit of a step back last year. Technically, I expect him to be back at it this year, being a much better blocker now that he's got a year of good health under his belt.
Sure.
Because like when you miss a lot of a off season because of a leg injury, a lot of that power that comes with run blocking is lost because you're not squatting, you're not cleaning, you're not leg pressing, you're not doing a lot of that kind of stuff.
You're doing a lot of upper body, but you're not getting the lower body involved. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're having to rebuild that. He's going to be back to that. So, I mean, there's going to be times when I'm hoping that you're seeing 12 personnel and Mitchell Evans is on the sideline because you're just coming out there trying to run the ball down somebody's throat. And those two guys are really good blockers. But then to your point, Vince, if one of those guys goes down, you got a cat like Cooper Flanagan that can just, you're good.
Plug him in.
Put him in there.
Yep.
Put him in there and be good to go.
Absolutely. The final guy we want to talk about, let's go to the offensive line, Brian. And we did talk about this guy a little bit yesterday. I brought him up in my sleeper category for potential All-America recognition, and that's center Ashton Craig. And I totally understand why he is brought up today because he is a sleeper and a lot of people aren't talking about him. And which to me, like, I guess I'm a big Ashton Craig fan, and I know Brian is as well. And he's just not brought up very often when talking about the offensive line. And the fact that he unseated a starter last year and forced him off the team just goes unnoticed for some reason. And I find that because Zeke Corral was a good player for Notre Dame. It's a good quality starter for Notre Dame. And Ashton Craig took over, and the coaches were like, hey, man, Zeke, thank you for what you've done. It's time to turn the page. And that's because of the play of Ashton Craig. And I'm a big fan of his. I think that he is going to be a steadying force in the middle of that offensive line. I think he's big, obviously. He's athletic. I mean, you look at the fact that he's 6'4", 308 pounds. It's obvious. It's an obvious physical upgrade from where they were last year. So you're going to see the center position played a little bit differently than you have in the past couple of years. But you cannot minimize the role of the center on an offensive line. Okay. I mean, that is hugely important. And the fact that he's going to have a new starter to his right, potentially a new starter in the position to his left, and two new starters on the outside. I mean,
yeah, you keep saying that new starter thing, but remember, every game that Ashton Craig started, Billy Schrouth was starting beside him to the right.
That is true. That's a good point. That's
so
a very good point.
For Ashton, that's not a new starter.
That's a very good point.
To the left side, sure, because if Pat Coogan doesn't start, then obviously you're going to have Rocco Spindler, who he didn't play with last year, but he did play with Billy. And the other part of it too is he played the whole offseason or the whole season during practices with the second group. It's him and Billy.
Right. So that relationship is pretty solid.
That one I'm not worried about. It's what's going on the left side is the one that's a bigger question mark. But look, this is one that's interesting, Vince. I put Ashton on the board because I actually don't know that he's underrated by Notre Dame fans. I think he's one that I think Notre Dame fans have nailed. He's underrated nationally. He's like, it's Jagasol, it's Coogan, it's Billy Schrouth, rightfully so, on Jagasol and Schrouth. And then a lot of our attention talks about the right tackle battle and the left guard battle and all that. I think it's nationally where Ashton's not getting a lot of love because I think Notre Dame fans, this is one of those ones I think that they kind of nailed, Vince. I think fans saw how he played last year and were like, this guy's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now he's got to get stronger. he's got to get more physical. Somebody in the chat even just said, Brian J. Irish just said even Gerby Lambert gets mentioned more. Like, facts.
Yes, he
especially
does.
if we're talking like nationally.
Yeah, he definitely does.
But I think Notre Dame fans watched how he played the last 3 games last year, and you're like, yeah, this guy's pretty good. And he was only a redshirt freshman. And now he's now going to his 3rd year. He's going to have another year in the weight room under his belt. He now has, like I mentioned this the other day, Vince, and I don't remember if you were on the show with me or not, but when you look at, say, okay, well, this is concerning because Notre Dame went into last season with 2 interior players who hadn't played a lot, and it was a problem, because you had 2 new starters at guard. Now, you had a center last year, but you had 2 new starters at guard, and that's concerning because they didn't play well. And this year, you're going into it again with basically 2 redshirt sophomores starting at guard, and why is that not concerning? And my point was, well, going into last year, which was the 3rd year for Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan, they had combined for 22 snaps in their careers. 22 snaps. Billy Schrouth last year played 257 snaps, and Ashton Craig played 238 snaps. So that's like, I think, it'd be 295 snaps, right? So yeah, 295 snaps. 495 snaps between the 2 of them. So that's the difference. Is whereas the 2 new starters last year never played. I mean, literally 22 career snaps. Only 3 of them were from Pat Coogan. 22 career snaps. Now these guys have about 500, and that's the difference. They've played a lot more football, and that's why I say, like, yeah, it's a new look offensive line, but it's not like they're throwing a bunch of guys that have never played. Jack Gasol's the least experienced guy on the field for them, and he's also the most talented. But he also has a full start under his belt. So these interior guys are not, newbies per se. They've got a lot of snaps for quote unquote new starters. But when you look at it, Vince, the way that Ashton Craig played down the stretch, I mean, it's like that's and let's be honest about something else too, Vince. You and I both know this. Notre Dame did not tell Zeke Correll it was time to move on because of how well Ashton Craig played in the 3 games alone. It was about because, again, Zeke had moved on before the last game, before the bowl game. They kind of saw this coming during the season. The way he was practicing, the way he was preparing, the way that he was looking as part of the second team offense, getting reps in practice. It was kind of like this kid's surging.
Right.
And then he steps into the starting lineup with Billy Schrouth. And in the 3 games that those 2 kids played together, they averaged 251 rushing yards a game. It's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's coming in off the bench, essentially. Now they've got an entire offseason to know that they're going to be the starters and preparing the way that they are preparing to be the starters and all of those different things. And I just think you're going to see, everybody's worried about the offensive line, and rightfully so. There's some question marks there. And I get it. I get why the conversation is there. But I'm also very excited to watch specifically those 2, but the entire offensive line as a whole do their thing. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be run-throughs. There's going to be issues. I get it. But the positives are so going to outweigh the negatives, and the negatives will, it'll be a trend of getting less and less and less as the season wears on. And that's obviously what you want as a coaching staff and things like that. And I do think that Ashton Craig will be, pardon the pun, but right in the middle of that. He's going to be a big part of that in the middle of that line. And so that's why he's on this list, and rightfully so. Well, that's going to do it for the offensive side of the football, Brian. And so make sure everybody, come on now, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your friends, your family, share with the bum on the street, man. Share with anybody. They've got a cell phone. They want to listen to the podcast. They got stuff to do. So share with anybody that you can. Just share, and share alike. All right. And make sure you get on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. Really appreciate you guys being over there. There's a great thread about the Pizza Hut buffet over on the board. You're going to want to check that one out. Just putting it out there. There's good stuff always. So make sure
got me thinking about the Book It program when we were kids.
Yep, 100%. The button with the stars and your personal pan. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. We went down memory lane last night on the show, and it was
I heard
it made me hungry. I'm not gonna lie.
I heard.
All right, everybody. So make sure you do all that. Really appreciate it. All right, part 2 of our underrated standouts and top role players. Let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. Brian, we've got more candidates on defense than we did on offense, which is going to be a lot of fun. But let's start up front. And our number one underrated standout is actually new to the roster this year, coming over from Duke University. And that's RJ Oben. And he is not talked about all that much, which is very interesting considering he was a very high priority guy for the staff in the transfer portal and comes over and steps into the starting position.
Well, he's another one that I look at, and I think there's a little bit of an underratedness with the Notre Dame fan base. He came from Duke. He didn't come from some big time school. He didn't have crazy numbers, but he's way more productive in his career so far, Vince, than what Javonte Jean-Baptiste was coming into Notre Dame.
Right, absolutely.
But his underrated to me is more about nationally. You're just going to drink that right there.
I know. I meant to say something to you before the show. I was like, do you want me to pour this in a cup?
Yeah, that'd have been nice.
That. I know.
That'd have been nice. I'm over here drinking water and tea.
I know.
It's all messed up.
I was in a hurry at the end. I was like, grab the
bottle. Sorry, podcast listeners. You didn't see Vince took a big swig of Mountain Dew, and I'm trying to quit Mountain Dew, so it's really messed up. At least you can go, you know.
Yeah.
But back on track here.
Sorry.
But with RJ Oben, I think it's more of the national lack of discussion about him. You know, they talk about the D tackles, but it's like, but the defensive ends are a problem. I'm like, are the defensive ends a problem? Viper's a problem. But I think Notre Dame has one of the best defensive end, like strong side end rotations around, to be honest with you. I mean, you talk about how many years in the past would Bryce Young just walk into Notre Dame and just step right in the starting lineup?
Seriously.
Number 2. And now he's like battling to even get to be the number 2. And here's the crazy thing. RJ Oben may not even end up being the starter by the end of the season. But it was good to see him flash a little bit in the blue gold game, because I didn't see a lot from him in the spring, to be honest with you. I wasn't overly impressed with what he was doing, but it was good to see him kind of finish on a strong note.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, just because of the situation and the circumstances of him coming to Notre Dame, they're just like, oh, it's Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the second, essentially. You know what I mean? And same position, yeah. Different player, yeah. And you're right. He comes with more statistical baggage in a good way than Javonte Jean-Baptiste came with. You know what I mean? He was a perennial backup at Ohio State, and he was looking for an opportunity to be a starter, and he found it at Notre Dame. That's not the case with RJ Oben. RJ Oben was one of the best defensive linemen that they had, because I remember him playing against Notre Dame and what he was able to do against Notre Dame, right? And so he is a very exciting player to bring in, and he's just not talked about very much.
Now they need him to really step up and play at a high level.
Absolutely.
That's going to be the key. And show leadership. I mean, that's the other thing too, is he's going to have to be a leader of that group too, because you do have younger guys that are a part of that conversation. So he's a guy that doesn't get talked about a lot, and he's a guy that's very important. I mean, Notre Dame can be good at defensive end without him stepping up.
Sure.
But it'd be way better if he did. And the other thing too is if there are problems of Viper and RJ doesn't make that transition, then you're less likely to be able to move him or move Josh Burnham over to Viper. But if RJ balls out and Josh Burnham balls out and Bryce Young's ready to go and you're having issues with Viper, easy solution. Like, there's no excuse for Notre Dame to have a great defensive end play, struggle at Viper, and then not do something about it. There's just no reason to do that.
Right.
No reason 100%. To do that. But that only happens if all three of those guys step up and play, and RJ can be that guy. And we've shown him he's a clutch player too. I mean, he's had some big stops in different games as well. And him stepping up is important, but he doesn't get talked a lot about. And I would have thought after what Javonte Jean-Baptiste did last year, I'd have thought people would be drooling over what.
I know, right?
Now that you get this guy in here who actually was a pretty good player.
It's a better resume coming in. I mean, he just does.
Way better.
Yeah.
He's a 3-year starter at Duke.
Right.
Who won 17 games the last 2 years. I mean, I think we kind of forget that. Like, well, Duke sucked. No, they didn't. They were literally won 17 games the last 2 years.
Right.
So and had an excellent defensive line. Excellent defensive line.
Right.
So it's
yeah, it's going to be fun to watch, frankly. And I don't think he's going to be on this list for very long. I'll just say that. I think once the season gets started and people get to watch him play and kind of the manner in which he plays and all of those different things, I think that, yeah, he's going to come off this list very quickly. Let's stay on the defensive line, Brian, for the next player that we want to talk about. And this is a guy that I think doesn't get a lot of recognition, at least as of right now and in June and in the offseason, et cetera. And that's Gabriel Rubio. And what he's going to be able to bring to the table on the defensive line, I think, is a very underrated situation based on just based on the circumstance, based on the guys that are coming back. And look, he's not going to be a starter. And does that matter, right? When you have a rotation the way they do on the defensive line and all of that. Rubio's a forgotten guy, I feel like, a lot of the time.
Partly his own fault, right?
That is a good point.
Whatever happened with him that had him at home last semester. And I don't want to say his fault because I don't know what it was. It could have been a personal issue but it was because he was gone. Correct. And the reality is he was a highly ranked guy that hasn't put up great numbers, but he hasn't put up great numbers because he's been buried behind some really good defensive linemen. It was Jason Adamiola 2 years ago and Riley Mills and Howard Cross last year. But here's the reality. You go back and look at games last year when Gabriel Rubio was healthy, this defensive line was even better because they had a legitimate off the bench, like run stopper at defensive tackle. And I think Gabriel is going to come into the season a little motivated, to be honest with you. Now, he's got some growing up he still has to do, and I'll just leave it at that. But if his time away causes him to grow up a little bit and focus on don't let off-field distractions take away from what you're trying to accomplish on the football field. And I'll just leave it right there. And if that happens, and I think Gabriel is going to be a difference maker this year. And he's another important guy where the better he plays, the less you have to rely on Howard Cross for volume, which means Howard Cross in the fourth quarter of games is going to be more fresh, and Howard Cross in November and in December and January is going to be more fresh. Yeah. And then also in those games where maybe you're playing a team that's really big and physical, okay, this is a Gabriel Rubio game because he checked in at 316 on the depth chart. So, I mean, you go with Riley Mills, who's going to be 300 plus, and then you go with him, and now all of a sudden you got a big old 300 plus pound inside guys, and they're going to be pretty darn good. Yes. And that's going to be important. And I think the point that you make about taking reps away, not taking them away, but supplementing the reps of the starters. It's taking them away. It's taking but in a good way, burden off of it. Yes, right. There you go. Yes. Because when I say taking reps away, it sounds like you're stealing reps, like in a bad way. You know what I mean? That's not what I mean at all. If Notre Dame's going to be the success that we think they can be, they're going to be playing 15, 16 games. Like that doesn't just happen. You want to talk about it like a freshman wall. There's going to be a wall for other guys too, because they've never played that many games before, right? And so you need to be able to manage that, and that starts game 1. That's not something that you start managing game 12, right, or game 11. You have to start managing that game 1, and you need guys like Gabriel Rubio to step up so that you can participate in that game management and the snap management and all of those different things. And like I said the other day, I think the coaching staff that handles roster management the best as far as snap counts and all of those different things, and not in a way that is going to affect wins and losses, and you're going to give up games and things like that, but in a manner that you've got the freshest team possible come the middle of December into January. That staff and that team and that program is going to have the best shot of winning the entire thing. And you're going to see that with this 12-team playoff, and then in the future with the 14-team playoff. You're going to see that be more and more and more important, and more teams subscribing to those kinds of theories. Those are the teams that are going to be successful. And so the staff that gets on board with that first out of the box, with this expanded playoff, is going to be the team in the program that has the best chance of moving forward. It's not going to be the be-all, end-all, but it's going to be incredibly important. It's going to be incredibly important. And guys like Gabriel Rubio will allow coaching staffs to be able to do that in the best way possible.
All right. Sticking on the defensive line, Brian, I think this particular young man has the opportunity to really make a splash from a statistical standpoint. He's coming in, I believe, as the number 2. I mean, yeah, right, exactly. I love that face because right. That's exactly that's what's going on in my head as I think about it. We're talking about Josh Burnham, and I think this is going to be just an absolute breakout year for him.
Yeah.
And he is just not talked about that much.
No.
At all. And I think he is going to be so good. I am the assistant conductor on this hype train. I'll tell you that right now. I'm excited.
You're the what on the hype train?
The assistant conductor. I
Okay,
don't think I'm the the main man, but I'm on board. I am on board with what he's going to be able to do.
For Josh, it's really just about still learning how to play the position.
Sure.
That's really what it boils down to. I mean, he's got a great motor. He's twitchy. He's strong. It just comes down to, can he learn the nuances of the position? Because that's what he's going to need. You know, can he learn how to win around the edge? Can he learn how to, get through guys? Can he learn how to properly use his hands to keep defenders or blockers off his body? Can he be a guy that comes out and says, hey, look, I'm going to dominate this game, not just with my athleticism and my strength and my motor, but I know how to win at the point of attack. Like that's the thing for Josh. Cause like Josh would have a lot of snaps last year where you're like, first 2-3 steps should be a win. But then you're like, but then it wasn't a win. It ended up being a stalemate because Josh didn't know how to win at the point of contact. And that's because he's switching positions and he was playing linebacker and he's still learning all that. If Josh can learn the nuances of the game and improve that part of the game, then I think he will have a breakout season. And he was still disruptive last year. I mean, he's a good football player last year in limited reps, but to the point where it's not that he's a good number 2, that he's the number 1. And even if RJ starts, you look back, RJ started and he played 22 reps and Josh played 25 reps. And then Bryce played 15 or whatever. I mean,
it's such a loaded position.
Yeah. But at the same time, if RJ breaks out and Bryce is ready to roll and you're struggling a Viper, then throw one of those two. And honestly, at this point in time, I'd almost say move RJ over there. Instead of Josh.
Interesting.
That's what I would think about.
I do think they're going to need help at Viper at some point. And I think one of those 3 guys, probably one of the 2 guys, is going to move over at some point. That's just how I see it breaking out. I think you're going to have a lot of talent at the big end position with those 3 guys. I really do. And Bryce Young is going to force the issue. I think is going to be a big part of that equation. I don't think they move him because I don't think they want to move a freshman. You know what I mean? But I think they move one of the other 2 guys who can handle it mentally of moving to another position and then allows Bryce to get more snaps as the number 2 guy. Because I'm just not convinced at the Viper position. And I think Josh's play will also potentially force that issue because you're going to have 3 guys playing at a high level. I feel like that. And there's only so many snaps at one position. And so in a positive way, they're going to force a position move. You know what I mean? And then they're going to be able to pick up those snaps at Viper.
I hope so.
And maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah,
maybe the Viper guys step up and it's not the issue that I think it could potentially be, but I love the talent at big end. I do.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it shakes out.
Agreed.
Let's move 5 yards back and talk about
this is going to be interesting.
It is going to be very
after what we talked about yesterday. This is going to be very interesting.
This is true because you and I, based on our conversation yesterday, are both very high on Jack Kaiser.
Yeah,
and
which is funny because his dad thinks I think he sucks.
Really?
His dad blocked me on Twitter. Yeah, because I criticized him after a game.
Wow.
And his dad got all mad. And was like, I'm like, I've been pretty high on your kid the whole career, but he didn't play well. Like, I don't know what you're all upset about. But yeah, but I'm been very high on Jack.
Yeah, we're both high on Jack.
My issue is how I didn't always like how they used him.
Yeah, and that's not Jack's fault.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not wrong.
Nice
about
guy,
that.
though. I just
Yeah.
kind of an overreaction, in my opinion,
Well,
to it. But it happens.
when people are criticizing your kid, not criticize, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
I
get
mean,
you.
that's fine. And
Yeah,
I've
but
talked to
just
parents who don't like that.
sure.
It's more of a his reaction to it was a little like,
Yeah.
okay.
I've had a good conversation with a parent. I know we're veering off here. Had a great conversation with a parent who thought I was criticizing his kid, and that was
For
not
Notre
the
Dame?
case. Yeah, at Notre Dame, and that was not the case. And we had a great conversation about it. He's like, "Oh, I appreciate you clearing that up for
Yeah.
me." I was like, "Yeah, man. Like,
Yeah.
we're not out to get your kids.
The
man."
vast majority get it.
Yeah,
The vast majority get like, look, we got a job to do, and we're giving you our honest opinion.
right. Exactly.
But no, and look, here's why Jack's on this list. Jack's on this list because he's just not being talked about a lot, which is kind of funny because like there was like I forget what football site it was, but they had Jack Kaiser as a first round draft pick like 2 years ago. We kind of laughed about it. I was like, guys, come on, like we're being a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it gets down to it where it's like, okay, but he's a really good football player. I've talked how many times this offseason about how productive he's been on a per snap basis. Now I have questions about Jack transitioning to a pure inside linebacker.
Sure. From a size standpoint. Yeah, right.
And I thought it was ridiculous that they started him a Mike linebacker last year against Central Michigan. It was a huge wasted opportunity to get Drake Bowen on the field because why? Jack's not a middle line. He's not a Mike.
Right.
And that was it was wasting what he does well, in my opinion. So, but he's a good player, but I look at all preseason All-American lists and top-ranked linebackers, and not many view him as a top-ranked guy. I think Lindy's had him pretty high, but Notre Dame fans is really the ones that I think have really underrated Jack, because it's kind of like we're still in that, okay, well, sure, JD and Marist were better than we thought, but they're gone now. Now it's time to turn to the young guys. And I'm like, but what if the young guys aren't better than Jack Kaiser? Because I don't think they are.
Right.
At least not right now. So he's a very important part of it. But here's the other thing too about Jack. He is so important because they are so young. He has to be the grown up in the room. Mm-hmm. He has to be the leader. He has to be the guy to make sure everybody's working in the same direction, because you do have so many young kids. But he's, at the end of the day, that's going to be secondary to, he's got to be a playmaker.
Sure.
And that's where I get excited about, if he can make the transition inside, block destruction, proper gap fitting and things like that, which is a little bit unique to what he's done on a full-time basis. He's done it at times. I've talked about this. There's plenty of times where they would bring him inside and bump the will down and bring him off the edge, and Jack's tucked inside. It's not foreign to him, but it's one thing to do it occasionally. It's another thing, and it's quite another thing to do it every snap.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's going to have some adjustments to make, but I think Jack Kaiser's a good football player, and I think he's a much better athlete than Notre Dame fans realize. Like, if somebody tried to tell me, he's like, well, Jack, Jalen Snead's just such a better athlete than Jack Kaiser. And I was like, you sure about that? I'm like, you sure about that? Like, because I know he's not faster than Jack. Like, that's been proven.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I told the story of when they raced when Jalen was a freshman, and Jalen was like, kind of talking about how fast he was, and Jack was like, all right, cool, let's race. And it wasn't close. It wasn't close.
I love that, by the way.
And that's, but he's that kind of athlete, but he doesn't get, he's not a real big guy, and he doesn't look like what you think an impact linebacker looks like.
Well, as you said, he gets lumped in with the group that is outgoing from last year, right? I mean, he gets lumped in with that group, and everybody's ready to turn the page and all of that. And I think, his role off the field is going to be incredibly important this year. I think the level of play of these young guys is going to have a lot to do with Jack and his mentorship and his leadership in the room and all of those different things. It's going to have, if those guys play well, you better be giving a pat on the back to Jack, because he's going to be a big part of that, number one.
Yep.
But you're absolutely right. He also needs to produce on the field. I mean, that you don't give scholarships away to guys just because they're good dudes, okay? Yep. And good leaders. Right. Maybe the 84th,
because that was our beef with Joe Schmidt, right? Like, why
Absolutely.
are you? I mean, yes, I get it. He's super smart. He's a great leader, but he shouldn't be your starting Mike linebacker in 2015.
Correct.
The difference here is Jack is actually an outstanding athlete. There's a difference. Jack isn't some like sawed off former walk-on, like Jack's a 6'1", 225, 230 pound legit. I mean, I know he's pumped up to 235 now, but he should be around 230. Guy that can run I mean, legitimately run. Like,
Yes.
he's going to have a really good combine. Like,
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I was kind of bummed that J.D. Bertrand didn't get to do the combine or pro day, because I was waiting on him to be able to put up numbers that you and I know he's put up at Notre Dame, but Jack's even faster than he is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that he's the instinctive inside linebacker JD was. We'll see.
He's got that remains to be seen. Yes, exactly.
He's got to prove that, but he's pretty instinctive outside. But this is new for him. I mean, because remember, Jack was a free safety in high school, quarterback and a free safety.
Correct.
So this is a little bit of a different animal for him. But he's had 2 games where he started at inside linebacker. Remember last year against Central Michigan, but then the year before that, it was what was it, against North Carolina in 2022 when Jack or JD got kicked out at the end of the Cal game for targeting.
Oh, that's right.
And Jack came in, and the defense, first drive of the game, North Carolina goes right down the field and scores on him. But after that, the defense buckled down and played very well the rest of that half and shut North Carolina down. So we've seen it before. Seen it before. I'm just curious how they're going to use him.
That's going to be huge. That's going to be really, really important. And how some of these young guys, are they going to push him? What is that going to look like? Is he going to be able to hold on to his job? And that comes down to production on the field. And so I don't understand why people aren't talking about him as much, but I do understand because they don't understand where and how he's going to be used. And those are legitimate questions, but he's going to be a very, very important piece of how this defense operates, from an on the field and off the field, discussion. So he's absolutely somebody that belongs on this list. And if he does what we think he can do, that's why he was on the list yesterday.
Yeah. Because I feel like we're talking about maybe being an All-American, and I feel like there's part of the fan base is like, wait a minute, he should be getting benched.
Right.
Like play Jalen Sneed or, play Kingston.
Oh, there's a lot of people that think that.
Okay, well, play those guys. Yes, play those guys. We've been begging for that for years. Play those guys. But we know who the starter is. That's the key.
Let's jump back into the secondary, and we talk about how good this secondary is going to be, and we talk about this particular player, I think, a decent amount, but he does kind of get lost in the shuffle a little bit when you talk about Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison and Christian Gray, and then who's going to be the other safety and all this, and you kind of forget about the fact that Jaden Mickey is still a really good corner and a really good defensive back and a versatile defensive back. You can use him in a couple of different ways. And I think that's why he belongs on this list, because I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think we both think that Christian Gray is going to have the spot opposite Benjamin Morrison, what does that mean for Jaden Mickey? Well, there's always going to be a rotation there, right? Jaden Mickey's going to play, and he's going to be an important part of this defensive secondary.
Yeah, and I think Jaden's going to play a lot more than maybe people think. I think that Notre Dame is, for similar reasons we've talked about at other positions, but I fully anticipate Notre Dame going out there and it being more of a rotation than it was last year. Like, I don't see Christian Gray playing the same volume of snaps as the field corner that Cam Hart did. I think we're going to see Jaden play more. And the question is going to be, do they then use Christian to play both field and boundary? Like, so when they want to take Benjamin out, do they put Christian in the boundary, or do they just try to find a number 2 behind Benjamin? That's going to be another part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, part of that's going to be determined, in my opinion, by Jaden Mickey. Hey, how good is Jaden Mickey so good that you're just like, look, we have to play him more, but we don't want to take Christian off the field. So how do we do that? We play them together at times in order to give Benjamin a rest. That those are things that are going to be key. But this also is like, this is underrated guys, but this is also talking about like, who are the top role players?
Yeah.
And if Jaden Mickey goes into this season with the right mindset, he's going to be one of the best role players on the team, because he's going to be that guy that, in my opinion, could be a lot like what Jack Kaiser was last year. He only played 300 some snaps, but man, he was real productive on those 300 some snaps. He had, 4 pass breakups and 3 picks and, that kind of thing, because of the style of play he has. And if, depending on how Notre Dame uses him, but that's kind of, with him, Vince, it's, he's not the star that those 2 guys are talent wise. He doesn't have their size. He doesn't have their athleticism. He's just not that dynamic that they are, but he's a very good football player. He's smart. He's physical. I mean, we've heard stuff from people around Notre Dame that he benches 225 over 20 times. That's nuts for a corner. Like, that's insane for a sophomore cornerback. So he's very strong, but when he's in there, it allows you to do some things maybe that are a little bit different than what you will do with Christian Gray. And that's something I'm very interested in seeing, like how they use those two in together.
He's going to be an integral part of this defense. You'd have a hard time convincing me that they're not going to need Jaden Mickey in every single game that they play, and sometimes maybe even more. Because look, we don't know if Benjamin Morrison is going to be ready for game one. We think he probably will be, but we don't know that. And I don't know if you've heard, but game one's kind of important for Notre Dame this year on the road and all those different things. And I want Benjamin Morrison out on the field. There's no doubt about it. But I'm not having heart palpitations if Jaden Mickey's out there instead, right? And I think Christian Gray would be in for Benjamin Morrison. I think Mickey would be on the other side. But that, we can talk X's and O's another time. But the point of the matter is the moment's not going to be too big for him. I think he's got the athletic ability to be successful. I think he's going to be just fine, right? I mean, nobody's gone through more off the field than he has, and it translates to the field. I mean, he's a very heady kid. I don't think he gets, spooked when he's on the field. I think he does a really good job. And so he's going to be a very, very important piece of this defense. And he's not getting the love I think that he deserves at this point. But again, he is going to prove to be very, very important to the secondary for sure. The last guy we're going to talk about real quick is the guy I wanted to bring up. And I don't know if you agree with me that he belongs on this list, but we can have a quick discussion about it because I know that he's one of your favorite players. And when I brought him up, you're like, I talk about him all the time. I don't know what you're talking about. But I got Jaden Ausberry is the guy that I want to talk about here real quick. And the reason I thought that he should be on this list is because I think he falls under the category of top role players. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I really don't. Are they going to put him in at nickel sometimes? Are they, they're going to be in their base and have him at rover? I don't know what it's going to look like, but I feel like when he's on the field, he's going to be making plays. And so that puts him in the top role player category for me. That's the reason he came to my mind. Go ahead, shoot me down.
I'm not going to shoot you down.
I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
You're such a baby, Vince.
I'm joking.
No, in all seriousness, I mean, the role player part I completely agree with.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be a very important role player. I don't think he's underrated, but that's not the only thing that we're kind of looking at here. Right. It's also kind of guys that, aren't stars, aren't starters, that are going to be very important players. And he's absolutely that, in my opinion. Like, his emergence this year is important. They need him to step up and play well. So yeah. I'm good with him. I'm good with him, yes. to be there, especially for that role player piece. Yeah. Because again, that's going to be a very, very important part of it.
I am intrigued about how they're going to do it, right? Because he's been cross training at rover and nickel and doing some different things. And I mean, you could drop him down in the box at times. Like, there's a lot of things you can do with him where I think he can be successful. But where's that niche going to be in 24? And that is absolutely intriguing to me to see kind of how they want to use him and what that looks like and all of that. But I think he's going to be a key, however that he gets on the field. Once he's on the field, once he's between the white lines, I think he's just going to make plays, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch for sure. We do talk special teams on this show, and we are going to roll over to the special teams side of things briefly. And we talked a lot of special teams yesterday when we talked about potential All-Americans and all of this. And there's only really one spot that we need to talk about special teams wise, I think. And it is who's going to be the snapper, and that person needs to step up and be an important role on this team. And, Bryan and I had a fun discussion the other day, and it was a text discussion, if I'm not mistaken, but we were talking about the different potential guys that are going to be the long snapper at Notre Dame. And we were talking about how different they are physically, I think is the best way to put it. And there is a big difference between the guys that are competing for the long snapping job, because you have one guy who is 6'3", 222. You got one guy who's 6'4", 232. And then, according to a lot of people, the leader in the clubhouse is 5'7", 198. And so who do you want to be your long snapper, your short snapper, and all that? I guess you don't really want the little guy, but if he's the best at the job, then I guess you go for it. But what are your thoughts on the situation, Brian?
I have none. This is your conversation.
Oh, my bad. All right. Well, you had it written down, so I went for it.
I told you before the show, like, let's not talk about special teams because we talked about those guys yesterday, but I knew you were going to bring it up anyway. Because
I got lost in translation. That's
it's
my
all
bad.
good. It's all good. No, I mean, it's like, look, long snapper's always that overlooked, nobody talks about unless he screws it up.
That's fair.
And that's it, right? So, and for Notre Dame, that's why we never talk about long snappers, because for a long time they've been as good as anybody at producing just steady, consistent guys. And we talk about you got to replace Cam Hart, you got to replace Joe Alt. Michael Vincent's a pretty tough replacement as well.
Yes, he is. He's one guy you didn't have to worry about for the entire time he was here. I mean, you just didn't have to. I mean, how many long snappers had NIL deals? With the specific company, not just the blanket NIL deal that went to the entire team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, he was a pretty important piece to this entire thing. And so it's going to be interesting to see who wins that job. And do you want a 5'7", under 200-pound guy going down on punt to make a tackle? Or do you want a guy that's over 6 foot? It's going to be interesting to see. But it's intriguing to me, maybe not a lot of other people, but I do want to see who wins that job. And hopefully that kid can just be just a consistent, that's all you want. Just consistent, repeat the motion, do what you want to do, what you need to do, and all of those different things. And so hopefully whoever lands that job does those things. And so that's why we were going to briefly bring up the long snapper, because it is a position of question at the moment. So that's why we did that. So that's going to do it for this section of our little chat today about defense and special teams and underrated standouts, top role players, etc. Make sure you hit the like button right there, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share with your family and friends, and jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Lots of fun discussion going on over there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I looked at it this morning. I think there's an update there on some recruiting and some different things over there. So you definitely want to jump on. There's new stuff every day. And I try to check it every single day, a couple times a day, just to see what else is going on. I get a lot of my info from the boards. And so, and not just from, Brian and Ryan and that. I mean, our posters put out some good stuff, man. There's a great start, bench, cut conversation going on over there that I thought was a lot of fun. So, again, go check it out. I know. I
don't want to cut any of those guys. They're all great.
I know, but it was a fun conversation to kind of read through. That's for sure. But so good conversations over there. Make sure you jump on board, everybody, and have a good time. All right, our final segment of the day. It is Thursday, so we are breaking down one of the Power Four conferences. And last week we did the ACC. This week it's that conference in the Midwest, sort of, the Big Ten. And we are going to talk Big Ten football today.
Nope. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah,
not
the Big Ten team that's not really in the Midwest anymore, that has almost twice as many as 10 teams. Sure, that conference. Yeah.
The one that has 18 teams, the biggest conference in the country because of their additions from this year. And so we are going to do a couple different things. We are going to rank who, the way we think the Big Ten is going to
regular season predictions.
Yep. How they're going to fall out 18-1. And then we're going to talk about sleeper teams, overrated teams, hot seat coaching, guys, top players, and who we think is going to be in the title game of the Big Ten, and then win that game to get that automatic bid in the college football playoff. And then we're also going to talk about how many teams we think are actually going to make it into the college football playoff, which I think is an intriguing conversation all by itself, because this is the first team for the 12-team playoff, and how many teams are the SEC and the Big Ten going to get in? So a lot of fun stuff to talk about, Brian.
It is, and this is a really fascinating league because I have really banged on the Big Ten for years for it being such a thin league. It's always very top-heavy. There's like 2 to 3 good teams. Sometimes it gets to 5. But there's like this huge drop-off between the top couple teams, sometimes just the top team in Ohio State, and they would just kind of dominate the league, and then there's a drop-off, and then there's another big drop-off. Well, what's interesting is I kind of feel bad for a lot of the traditional Big Ten teams because I think a lot of them have better rosters and better situations this year, but now you've added Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, and unfortunately for them, it's those teams in the middle and the bottom that are giving the hardest games and having to play all those teams. You know, they're not playing each other a bunch, but to play all those teams. And I think it's going to make for a very competitive year in the Big Ten. Like, I'm looking at the schedules and I'm like, you know, Ohio State's got a great roster, but like, okay, that's not going to be the easiest game in the world. You know, like that game could be a little bit tougher than maybe we think it could be. You know, but then you look at like, you know, Michigan's got a couple games like that. Penn State's especially got some games like that. You know, I really like Nebraska's roster, but then I'm like, holy moly, they got to play at Purdue, at Indiana, at Ohio State, at USC, and at Iowa. I'm like, well, that's not pleasant. You know, so, you know, I look at some of these other teams, like Minnesota's got a nice team coming back, in my opinion, and they got to play Iowa at home, at Michigan, home against USC, at UCLA, at Illinois, at Rutgers, at Wisconsin, home against Penn State. And you're like, dang, these schedules for those teams at the bottom are not fun. I like Purdue coming back. Their schedule is nuts. They play Notre Dame and at Oregon State in the non-conference, and they're home against Nebraska, at Wisconsin, at Illinois, home against Oregon, at Ohio State, home against Penn State, at Michigan State, at Indiana. And it's just like, good Lord. And so it's going to make for a fascinating year. It really is, because you've got the 4 new teams in the league, and we will talk about how we think the 4 teams will fare. The new teams will fare in the league. And I have one of the new teams near the top, and I have one of the new teams near the bottom, actually at the bottom of the Big Ten. And so it's going to be fascinating. Like, there's so many interesting storylines, Vince. Like, how are the teams out west going to handle playing in the conditions? Yeah. Well, you know, like Oregon and Washington, it shouldn't be that a problem. You know, like, say, well, you know, man, look at Oregon's schedule. Like, how are they going to be when they go play at Michigan and at Wisconsin in December? Well, my answer is a whole lot kind of like what it looked like sometimes when the Civil Wars played in the snow. I mean, like, it's the North. Okay, yeah, it's West Coast, but it's the North of the West Coast. They get snow. They get cold weather. You know, but that's going to be a little different than UCLA trying to go out there and play some games. You know, like USC, they hooked USC up this year. Their 2 road games in November at Washington and at UCLA. They don't play any Midwestern teams in this season. But then you look at some of these other teams and you're saying, like, okay, well, how are they going to fare going out there? And so it's going to be fascinating, Vince. It really is. And some of these matchups we've never really seen before outside of Rose Bowl games or bowl games are going to be interesting. You got a lot of you've got some new coaches in the league. How are they going to be? The new teams have some new coaches, right? The defending champ has a new coach.
Yeah,
right.
There's a lot of Big Ten teams. In fact, the majority of the Big Ten teams either have a brand new coach or a coach in the first couple of years of their tenure. And so finding a coach on the hot seat was a little bit difficult because there's a lot of guys that are still very early on that are going to get kind of the benefit of the doubt. You know what I mean? And it kind of surprised me, actually, how many staffs are fairly new,
relatively new
to their program. You know what I mean? So
yeah, because like Ohio State's got a veteran coach. He's been there since 19. Michigan's got a brand new coach. Oregon's coach is only his 3rd year. Nebraska's coach is only his 2nd year. USC's coach is only his 3rd year. Penn State's coach is a veteran. Iowa's coach is the grandfather of the league. Michigan State's got a new coach. Washington's got a new coach. UCLA's got a new coach. Indiana's got a new coach. Minnesota's PJ Fleck's been there for a while. Brett Bielema is what, year 3, year 4? That's it. Yeah. Mike Lockley's been there, what, year 4, right? And Rutgers, Grace Schiano's been there, what, going into year 3 or 4?
Yeah.
Purdue's coach is going into year 2, and David Braun at Northwestern is going into year 2 of being in charge, year 1 of him officially being in charge.
Right.
And then Luke Fickell's going into year 2.
Right.
So, yeah, a lot of turnover in this league the last couple of years.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. There's
Yeah.
no doubt. So it's gonna. I actually think it's gonna be a fun year in the Big Ten. And this is one of the reasons I look at it, Vince, and I say I don't think there's going to be any undefeated teams in college football this year, because the teams that have the best chance to go undefeated in certain leagues, like the SEC, they play really tough schedules. Well, the Big Ten did not give their two top teams, especially Ohio State. Ohio State's schedule is not that challenging compared to others, but they still got to go to Oregon and to Penn State. Right, those aren't going to be easy, and then they get Michigan at home. And now after that, they give them a nice, easy schedule. They get Nebraska at home, Iowa at home. So it's a very manageable schedule. But, dude, there's some losable games in there for Ohio State, who I expect to be very good. Oregon, you say, well, yeah, they're lucky they get Ohio State at home. Yeah, but they got to go to Michigan and to Wisconsin. Those aren't going to be easy games. I think Oregon actually has the easiest schedule of all the top Big Ten teams, in my opinion, because they get Ohio State at home. And then they get Michigan. They got to play at Michigan, who's down. They don't have to play Penn State. They don't have to play USC.
Their hardest road games at Wisconsin.
Yeah, I would argue at Michigan. I would say it's at Michigan is harder. I think Michigan is going to be better than Wisconsin this year. But but we'll see. We'll see. But it isn't playing last year's Michigan at Michigan. You know what I mean, Vince? So it's going to make for a fascinating year. And everybody talks about how tough USC schedule is. And I'm like, it's tough, but I don't know that it's as tough as people make it out to be in conference. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Oregon. And they get Penn State at home. So the thing that makes USC schedule hard is they start with LSU and end with Notre Dame. That's the thing that makes that a little bit tougher, But it's going to be a fun year in the Big Ten, Vince. And how does that impact the playoff hunt?
Yeah.
If this league kind of, eats itself a little bit, what does that say about that? How does that impact Notre Dame from a seeding standpoint? So it is going to be a very, very fascinating year. And there's a couple key games we're going to kind of zone in on how those turn out. Is going to tell us just how the seeding goes and how many teams gets in, Vince. But it's going to be a fun year to watch the Big Ten. There's no doubt.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go over our rankings and kind of where we put the Big Ten and how they're going to finish and all that fun stuff. So I'll go ahead and give mine first. You already have my list, so I don't have to go super slow, so you can write them all down. But here we go. Bottom to top. So living in Indiana, this is a fun one to put at the bottom. I got IU at number 18. I've got Illinois 17, Purdue 16, Northwestern 15, UCLA 14, Minnesota 13, the Spartans of Michigan State coming in at number 12, Maryland at number 11, Rutgers at number 10, former college football playoff team, Washington at number 9, Wisconsin at number 8, Nebraska at number 7, the Fighting Hawkeyes of Iowa at number 6, Michigan at 5, USC at 4, Penn State at 3, Oregon at 2, and Ohio State at number 1.
Who is your conference champion?
So obviously Ohio State and Oregon are going to be in the title game against one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, they do play each other during the regular season. I think Ohio State gets them in the regular season. I think Oregon gets them in the title game. So I'm going to say Oregon, no state. Oregon wins the championship game and gets the automatic bid.
So you have Ohio State beating Oregon in the regular season at Oregon, and then Oregon winning the rematch.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have Ohio State going undefeated?
Honestly, I haven't thought that far in advance. Let's see here.
And it's at Oregon, at Penn State, and then Michigan at home, Iowa at home, Nebraska at home.
Yeah, I do. I do have them going undefeated. But then I have them losing in the championship game, so they will not be undefeated going into the playoff, which meets your criteria of no undefeated teams in the playoff.
We're similar at the top. We got the same top two teams, Vince. I just have it flipped. I have it the other way around. Here's my list. Number 18, it's going to surprise some people, UCLA. Northwestern 17, partly because their schedule is rough. Like, they did not do David Braun any favors. They got to play at Washington, at Maryland, at Iowa, at Purdue, at Michigan. They get Illinois and Ohio State on a neutral field. They get Wisconsin at home. Like
Really?
that is not an easy.
What are the two
schedule.
neutral field games? Where do they play them at?
I think they're both going to be at Wrigley.
Oh, really?
Unless I read that wrong.
Oh, you could be right.
I thought I saw that they were both going to be at Wrigley. Yeah, let me pull that up real quick. But I that's what I thought I saw. They're playing Ohio State at Wrigley and then Illinois at Wrigley. Yeah, because remember their home stadium's going under construction.
That's right. They kind of revamped like the soccer field or something like that to be a football field. Yeah.
So I think that's gonna. I think they're not doing them any favors. So I have Northwestern 17. I have Indiana 16, Maryland 15, Purdue 14, Wisconsin 13. I actually have. I'm not super high on Wisconsin this year, and their schedule's not easy either. Minnesota 12, Rutgers 11, Illinois 10, Michigan State 9, Washington 8, Nebraska 7, Michigan 6, Iowa 5, USC 4. Penn State 3, Ohio State 2, and Oregon 1. So last week, Vince, we had a lot of the same teams in very similar areas. This week, this time we're actually kind of off on a lot of teams. So which makes it more fun, to be honest with you. But I think that adds to the uncertainty of the Big Ten because, like for me, Vince, part of it is I feel like you just kind of went off gut of how you think teams are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
There are teams that I would have higher if it was just off the quality of the team, but then you look at their schedule and their schedule's brutal.
I did not do that deep of a dive.
I went through and did I projected the win losses basically of the schedule.
Look at you.
And that's kind of how I got to what I got to.
Good for you.
So that's how I have my list. Now I have Ohio State losing a regular season game at Oregon, and then I have Oregon winning the rematch.
Okay.
So what I don't know is if Oregon's going to lose a regular season game or not. I haven't decided on that. So like the reason I still have them number 1 is because if they beat Ohio State head to head, it doesn't matter if they lose another game. They're still going to be the number 1 seed.
Sure.
The question is does Oregon lose to Michigan or Wisconsin on the road? That's going to be the question.
So you've got
Ohio State.
You've got to literally completely flip. So you've got Oregon winning Ohio State, but those two in the championship game and Ohio State winning it.
Correct.
From the number 2 hole.
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if one of those teams wins both games, it'll be Ohio State. It won't be Oregon.
That I tend to agree with. I guess I'm very bullish on Oregon this year. I think they're going to be pretty good. I really do. I think Dylan Gabriel is going to, kind of give them a little bit of a boost. I like Bo Nix. I think Dylan Gabriel's a little bit better of a quarterback.
What?
Seriously? I said it. Yeah, I did.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
I know.
Okay.
I went there. We'll see how it goes.
It's Bad Take Thursday. All right. It's good to know.
Wow. Okay. All right. I don't hang you out to dry like that, but that's fine.
I don't know. Now you're just teasing. Now you're just being mean. Look, Vince, I mean, this is part of the fun, right? I don't think Dylan Gabriel's I think he's a good system quarterback. I think Bo Nix is a much better player than Dylan Gabriel, especially what we saw of Bo Nix last year. Now, the talent around him is going to be pretty good. I think their receiving core should be pretty good again. Their offensive line should be pretty good. Their defense should be pretty good. I'm not in love with Oregon, to be honest with you. I think Oregon is a team that has benefited from favorable scheduling the last couple of years, to be honest with you. And you look at how I've pointed this out before. Look how they play out of conference. So the only Power 5 they played out of conference last year was Texas Tech, and they had to come back and win that game. They won 38-30. That's a bottom half of the Big 12 team, and they almost lost that game. They beat Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl. Whoop-de-doo. Then you look at 2022, they played Georgia in a neutral field and got obliterated, 49-3. Then they played BYU. They're not that good. And then they played North Carolina in a bowl game and won by a point in a game they should have lost, to be honest with you. So I just think Oregon has just been way better than athletically than everybody in the Pac-12.
Yeah, they would have been conference champs, no question, in the Pac-12 if it still existed.
Yeah. It's just I don't know how good they're going to be overall. Now, do I think they can beat Ohio State at home? Sure, I think they can beat Ohio State at home. But I would – it's going to be an interesting season. We're going to learn a lot about who they really are this year because they do play Ohio State at home. They do have to play at Michigan. They do have to play at Wisconsin. We're going to find out how they are. Although I think their schedule, they were done some favors in their schedule because they don't play Penn State. They don't have to play USC. and that's going to help them. I'm not as high on Wisconsin as others, and I think Wisconsin's in an interesting situation, Vince, because I don't love this Wisconsin team, to be honest with you, but their schedule is rough. They play at USC, so Wisconsin has to play Alabama in the non-conference, first of all. Then they play at USC. They got to play home against Penn State. They got to play at Iowa. They get home against Oregon and at Nebraska. So their schedule's not easy. No, they don't play Ohio State or Michigan, but the rest of their schedule's pretty tough. So that's part of my issue with Nebraska. I probably should maybe put them up a little bit higher. But, I think they're going to have a tough time this year because I just don't love that Wisconsin roster, and I don't think they're running a system that fits their players. To be honest with you, I don't think Phil Longo's system fits the talent that they have on that football team, in my opinion. So
you got them all the way down at 13. If I wrote,
but that's because of like projecting.
Sure,
and there's a lot of similar teams in that like 9 to 14 spot that they're a game apart or tied, and this team gets the head-to-head, that kind of thing, which makes it a little bit harder to project it. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering in those late season games are going to have a big impact on where a lot of those teams are ranked when it's all said and done.
For sure. Absolutely. So do you want to talk about some of the teams at the top, or are specific teams maybe that you want to, I mean, you've already talked about some of them. Is there anybody else you want to?
Let's first just say, who do you have from the Big Ten that you have in the college football playoff?
Okay.
What are the teams that you have in the college football playoff?
The top three is who I have in. So that would be Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. I think Penn State gets in. I don't know that they'll do a whole lot once they get in, but I think the stat that I read is if there was a 12-team playoff, they would have made it 6 of the last 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
because they're constantly overrated.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, 100%. And I don't think that changes this year. You know what I mean? And so I do think that they get in. I think the Big Ten gets 3 in. I just don't know that the rest. Like I feel like from a record standpoint, I feel like there's going to be a little bit of a drop after 3.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they're going to be able to have an argument to get a 4th in if it ends the way I think that it ends.
Yeah, it could be tough. Them getting an extra team in is determined by, are we right or wrong about Michigan? That's where it comes down to. Are we right or wrong about Michigan? Is Michigan going to be better than we think? I actually believe there's a chance the Big Ten only gets 2 in.
Okay.
And that's like it's not a great chance, but it's a chance. And here's why I say that. When you look at the schedules of the teams that I think are battling for that 3 to 5, the schedules are not favorable. And I look at Michigan, and I just don't think Michigan's going to be that good of a team.
Correct.
They're replacing their entire starting offensive line. They got a brand new unproven quarterback. They're replacing their entire receiving core. Half their defense is gone. Now, they got really good players coming back, but they're losing a lot. And then Michigan's schedule is not great either. They have a home game against Texas. We're going to learn a lot about them.
Oh, yeah.
Home game against USC. They got to play at Washington, at Illinois, at Ohio State. So, there's potential 3-4 losses in there for them. You look at USC, and I think USC is going to be a good football team. But you look at it, Vince, and it's like LSU and Notre Dame, you got to kind of go 1-1 against. If you go 1-1 against them, that's a heck of a season. And then you still got to play at Michigan, at Minnesota, at Washington, at UCLA, who's your rival, who I don't think is going to be very good. But as you know, rivalry games, throw the records out the window. And then they've got a home games against Wisconsin and Penn State, Nebraska. Like that, I could see 3 losses in there for them.
Sure.
And so the team, and then you look at Iowa, who tends to have like that 10-2 record. Maybe they're the 3rd option in the Big Ten. Well, they got to play at Minnesota, at Ohio State, at Michigan State, at Maryland. They get Nebraska, Wisconsin at home. Their schedule may be favorable enough for them to do that. Like I could see them beating Minnesota on the road. I could see them beating UCLA on the road. I could see them beating Michigan State on the road and maybe just going 11-1 or 10-2 because they don't have to play Oregon. They don't have to play Michigan. They don't have to play USC. So Iowa's schedule was set up real nicely for them to maybe make a run. Maybe they're the team that can get in. But here's where I'm at on Penn State, Vince. There's 2 games that are going to determine whether or not Penn State gets in my opinion. And the first one's right off the bat at West Virginia. And I think everybody's just kind of assuming that game is going to be a win for Penn State. And it should be. I mean, it should be a win for Penn State. But if you go back and watch the game that they played last year at the beginning of the season, that was a much more competitive game than the final score would otherwise dictate. And when you watch that game, I mean, Penn State was up 24-7, 31-7, but like it was very competitive for a while. And, Penn State kind of ran it up in the fourth quarter and scored a touchdown with 6 seconds left. And West Virginia wasn't a great team then. They got a lot better as the season went on. And so when I look at that, that's a team that beat Baylor on the road last year, blew out BYU, blew out UCF on the road. They lost by 2 points to Houston. They beat TCU on the road. They beat Texas Tech. They beat Pitt. Can Penn State come out and win that game? If Penn State wins that game, then their chances of making the playoff are higher. But, Vince, they still have to play at USC.
That's the stretch
at Wisconsin, home against Ohio State, home against Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota. There's the potential for multiple losses in there, which they can survive if they beat Wisconsin.
Yeah, the stretch for me in their schedule is the 3-game stretch of at USC, at Wisconsin, home against Ohio State. How they manage that 3-game stretch, I think dictates their entire season. And a lot of the same stuff that you said about West Virginia, I don't disagree with that. But if they can navigate West Virginia, I think they're undefeated going to USC. And how do they play out on the West Coast, right? And then they got to come back and do another away game at Wisconsin. They got to come back
and then fly. Exactly.
Which is not the easiest place in the world to play. They do have a good home field advantage. And then you get to host Ohio State. So, that 3-game stretch to me, as I was looking at their schedule, was like, okay, that's going to be really important.
The good thing for them is there is a bye in between the USC-Wisconsin game. So
you're right.
Like they at least have they don't have to travel.
I wish they would write that. I wish they would write that because I didn't. I was just looking at the actual games themselves. Yeah.
But that's Penn State's. And here's the thing too about Penn State early in the season is they're going to have a very new look offensive line. How does that hold up against West Virginia? Because I said that game's going to be key. Because if you get that game, it's kind of like Notre Dame, right? Like if Notre Dame can beat A&M on the road, you got a lot of get-right games until you got to play Louisville, and it's the same thing there. They get Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA at home before they got to go out to USC.
Right, exactly.
But, Minnesota's not going to be a pushover this year. They got a good quarterback from the FCS level. They got Tyler Williams transferring in from Georgia, who's very talented. They got a couple other good receivers coming back. Their O-line has a lot of guys coming back. They got a lot of guys on defense coming back. They're not going to be a pushover. I talked about Purdue's roster. I mean, I don't think it's going to be good enough to beat Penn State, but on the road in November in the Big Ten is look, the gap in talent between Penn State this year and Purdue this year isn't necessarily different than what it was between Ohio State and Purdue in 2018.
Sure.
When Purdue stomped Ohio State. So it's a tough stretch. It's a really tough stretch. So I could see there being a bit of a cannibalization of the Big Ten this year with each other.
Yeah.
Now you've got to hope that there aren't multiple Big 12 teams with 2 or fewer losses. You've got to hope that there aren't you've got to hope that, if Florida State and Clemson are both better good, you better hope Miami doesn't have a breakout year and have a couple upset wins over those teams. That's what you're going to have to hope for if you're the Big Ten, if that happens. Because I could see a lot of 3-loss teams in the Big Ten this year, because of the way the schedules are laid out and because of some of the non-conference schedules. Because I'll give the Big Ten credit. There's a lot of really good non-conference games in the Big Ten this year. Now, of course, Oregon doesn't have one. Their non-conference is Idaho, Boise State, and Oregon State. But Ohio State, theirs is pretty soft this year again as well. But Michigan plays Texas. Penn State plays at West Virginia. USC plays LSU and Notre Dame. Nebraska plays Colorado. You have Iowa plays Iowa State, big rivalry game. They should be a decent team this year. You have Michigan State plays at Maryland. Actually, no, that's not a non-conference game. At Boston College. You have UCLA plays at LSU. There's 2 teams in the league that play Fresno State this year. And Minnesota plays North Carolina. And so, Maryland plays at Virginia. So there's going to be some decent non-conference games this year, Vince, that you look at for this league and say, how are they going to handle those games? Can they dominate those games? And so like, but when you look at the teams that I view as like 3 and 4, and then 5, Iowa's got a pretty manageable schedule, but UCLA, Penn State and USC both have really tough road, road or away from home non-conference games against teams that won 9 or more games last year. I mean, West Virginia went 9-4 last year, right? Like that's not a bad football team, and their quarterback comes back. Should Penn State win? Yes, Penn State should win. But to me, it's not going to be a cakewalk. And then, you look at Washington and their schedule and how are they going to be? They should start. I mean, there's a chance they start 5-0 before they head to Michigan, but that at Rutgers game is not, Washington's not used to making trips like that. And Rutgers is going to be a real scrappy defense this year. Then they got Michigan at home, at Iowa, USC at home, at Penn State, at Oregon. That's not an easy schedule. So I look at it and I say there could be a little bit of a cannibalization here this season when it comes to the Big Ten.
Yeah,
that's where I look at it. And I
don't
know that any of those rosters after the top 2 are so good,
right,
that they can just nonstop week after week after week.
And isn't that the biggest issue with these conferences just trying to get so big is that they're going to start eating themselves alive, and the dream of like the SEC and the Big Ten each getting like 5 schools in, or whatever number is their.
Well, that's why they were
number.
trying to negotiate. That's part of the reason they were negotiating to get a guaranteed number of teams in, which is why you shouldn't do that.
Exactly, because you're going to end up getting teams from conferences. If they get automatic bids like that, you're going to get teams that aren't that good, or they just don't have that good of a record because they're just beating the crap out of each other. And again, that's the problem with making these conferences 18 teams. Like it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I agree with you. I think after the top 2, I think there's a drop. And then I think you do maybe 3, 4, 5-ish. And then there's another drop. And then you get a big chunk in the middle. And then you've got your chunk at the bottom. Like that's kind of how I see the Big Ten kind of shaking out this year.
I'd go to 6 just because I still am not sure how Michigan's going to be this year.
Sure.
Part of me wants to not discount Michigan, but then the other part of me,
Michigan's defense is going to be, they're still going to be good. They should be good.
But like, is it going to be good enough to handle that schedule? Because look, Iowa, Iowa's schedule never had Texas, USC at Washington, Oregon, and at Ohio State.
Yeah.
Because some of those great defensive Iowa teams would have lost a lot of those games 13-10. You know what I mean? 17-6, almost at 4, which for Iowa's possible.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
You're not wrong. The defense scores twice, basically. And
pretty much. I mean, they did win a game 7-6 a couple of years ago where they had 2 safeties. Remember that?
Yes.
They beat South Dakota State 7-6, and they didn't score a touchdown. So, but the point being, Vince, is adding those 4 teams makes it a lot harder for a team to have that kind of schedule. Although they tried to give Iowa that schedule this year. They did, because they got to play at Ohio State, but they don't have to play Oregon. They don't have to play Michigan. They don't have to play Penn State. So that could be the thing. But that's why I say when you look at their schedule, look at the SEC schedules, there's going to be a 3-loss team get in this year, at least one.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I do.
Now, that helps Notre Dame. This all helps Notre Dame a ton. It's why I say I'm not discounting Notre Dame getting in this year at 10-2. I'm not discounting that. But it's also imperative why you need to be in a 1 or no loss team, because now you're going to be able to lock in that 5 or 6 seed.
Right.
Because like Bill Bender had his college football playoff predictions out today and from Sporting News, and he had Notre Dame as the 6th seed playing Michigan in round 1.
Really?
Beating Michigan. And then they get Utah in round 2, beating Utah, and then they got to play Ohio State in the semis. Like that's why it's imperative to get that numbers 5 or 6 seed, because you're going to have a more favorable matchup in round 2. But the danger is you could end up getting one of these really good 3-loss teams at you know what I mean? Like that's but that's why the 5 seed is so important, because most likely then you're getting Memphis or Liberty or a team like that. You get the 6 seed, all of a sudden you get a 3-loss Michigan team or a 3-loss Penn State team or
that's where I'm hoping they get a
SEC team. Yeah,
I'm hoping they get a 2-loss Big 12 team in that slot. Yeah. That's what I'm hoping for.
Or a 3-loss SEC team that's got to come up north in December. you know,
100%.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I'm comfortable saying 2. If I'm going to say that they're going to get a third, I'm fine saying that. I just don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah.
But my gut is Penn State. If USC would have been able to get out of that game against LSU, I would have said they'd have a shot to be in the playoff as well. Because they play Michigan on the road, which will be tough. But if they could have, let's just say instead of LSU, they were able to switch that out and play Louisiana Lafayette. That's a win. You beat Utah State the next week. You go play at Michigan. Let's see how that game goes. But after that, you get Wisconsin at home, Minnesota on the road, Penn State at home, at Maryland, home against Rutgers, at Washington, winnable game, home against Nebraska, at UCLA, home against Notre Dame. And all of a sudden, their schedule gets a little bit like, okay, they get that LSU game off their schedule. Maybe we're having a different conversation about USC. So that would have been fascinating. So I think the way that the schedules were set up, and we're going to have a very similar conversation next week when we talk about the SEC, that some of these schedules are set up to where it's going to be really tough.
It's going to be cannibalism.
Yeah.
Within
really
the league,
tough.
You know? And that's why it's going to be tough, I think, for the Big Ten and the SEC to get those 3, 4, 5
or 4 or 5
if they
for
want.
Sure.
You know, like that's where the debates are going to start coming in, right? Because now you're going to start comparing schedules, and you're going to, and then it just becomes very subjective as to who gets in and who doesn't get in, and does Notre Dame need to be 11-1 to combat, you know, a lot of that conversation, and just. It's going to be fascinating, frankly.
Yeah.
It was what it's really going to be, because I think there's going to be a lot of talk about potential teams with 2 and 3 losses and whether they deserve
2
to be
for
in
sure.
Yeah.
But 3. And it's not outside the realm of possibility that there might be a 4-loss team that's at least in the conversation.
Ooh, that's crazy. But yeah,
I mean,
I'm not saying
just look at the
wrong.
schedule. That's like, it's not crazy to think about. You know, it probably won't happen, but it won't be crazy to think about a 4-loss.
It depends on the year.
In the conversation.
Yeah, it depends on the year.
Yeah,
who's
somebody pointed out, I'm not sure who said it, but somebody pointed out, like, Ole Miss would have been the 11 seed last year as like a 10-2 team. Last year, there was a lot of 2-1 loss teams because a lot of those teams didn't play anybody out of conference. And the leagues, like SEC was down, Big Ten was down. I think they're better this year. I think those leagues are better this year. And some of the teams that took a step back last year are going to take a step back up this year, and it's going to make it fun, Vince. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at the top, you know, you talk about the top contenders. You know, we talked about Michigan. Nebraska is a very fascinating team. We'll talk about when we get to the sleeper teams. But when you look at the top, Vince, here Iowa, they're the same old. They're going to be an elite defense. They're going to have a very good front seven, an elite secondary. It's all going to come down to, you got 4 starting offensive linemen coming back. You got a starting running back coming back. You've got a lot of your receiving core coming back, and Cade McNamara comes back healthy. That's the key to their team right there. They finally got rid of Brian Ferentz. Tim Lester's their new OC. He's okay. He's solid. He's former Western Michigan head coach, former Western Michigan quarterback as well. Solid football coach. Can he get them to be good enough on offense to win some more games this year? That's going to be the storyline with Iowa. I mean, it's the same story every year. It's the easiest team to talk about. Elite defense, one of the best head coaches in the game. Can their offense do enough to win games? That's what it's going to come down to.
Yep, 100%. And I mean, I've got them in the 6th slot. You've got them in the 5 slot, so it's very similar, but it's because of the defense. I mean, that's
if I were to move them, it would be to move them up.
Sure, absolutely, because they've got an elite defense.
Yeah, they went 10-2 last year, right?
Absolutely. It was some
and their offense is not going to be worse than it is this year or last year. Their offense this year will not be as bad as it was last year.
How could it be? I mean, how could it?
And they had so many injuries, and just their quarterback was awful. I mean, just awful. Cade McNamara is a kid that's got a playoff start under his belt. You know, so it's going to be interesting how it plays out. But Iowa's interested. USC is another fascinating team. I got them 4th.
Me too.
Yeah, depending on the way their schedule's set up, they could be 7th or 8th.
Yeah, easily
in the league. You know, so like, but I still go down to it when you look at all the talent they've got coming in on defense. The 2 DBs from UCLA coming in, the 2 defensive players, 1 linebacker, 1 safety from Oregon State coming in. You've got a lot of your 2 best defensive linemen from last year back. Anthony Lucas is back. You've got Nate Clifton from Vanderbilt. I just think their defense is going to be more talented, more experienced, And the other part of it too, Vince, is you're going to be much better coached defensively than you were last year. The offensive line's got some question marks, but look, they got Elijah Page kind of being their Charles Jagasol. It's a kid that we liked a lot, top 100 player that Notre Dame committed Notre Dame, decommitted, goes to USC. Worked out okay for Notre Dame. They got some good players there, but how are they going to be, Vince? That's another team that I just don't know how good they're going to be. They could be fourth. They could be third. I could see USC finishing as high as third in the Big Ten this year. I could.
Sure.
I flat out could. I could also see them finishing sixth or seventh in the Big Ten. Because keep in mind, two of their losses are not going to be conference. Like two of the losses that people think they have are not conference losses.
LSU and Notre Dame.
Yeah, they could be 8-4 and finish third in the Big Ten because two of their losses would be non-conference. And the conference, obviously, the conference record is reflective of your your conference ranking is reflective only of your conference record, not your top 25. So those are going to be fascinating teams. And then Oregon and Ohio State. Ohio State's got the better roster to me. But Ohio State, Vince, has got a couple games on there that are going to be really interesting. Really interesting. So, you play at Michigan State. It's a game they should win, but that game has – I don't know why. That game just kind of is on my mind. Iowa is going to be a very big test for them offensively. How good is their offensive line really? How good is Will Howard? That's the first game. Game 5 is the first game we're going to look at and say, okay, how's their quarterback situation? How's their offensive line situation? Then after that, they go to Oregon. Then they have Nebraska at home and at Penn State. It's been a while since Ohio State's had a 4-game stretch like that. And that's gonna be one of those things, Vince, you look at and say, that's going to tell us just how good the Buckeyes are, man.
Yeah.
Are they what we all think they are, which is one of the best teams in college football, which is what I think they are? Or are they a team that just doesn't quite have the psyche and the mindset to be that kind of team? It's going to be fascinating. They have a bye week right in between Oregon and Nebraska, but that's going to make or break. Are they a number 1 or 2 seed, or are they a team that gets in the bottom half of the playoff? That's going to be fascinating. And is this year Penn State finally gets that done? Because if Penn State can't beat Ohio State, it's going to be a lot tougher for them to get into the college football playoff, Vince. A lot tougher, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So what's Ohio State going to be? And then Oregon, like I said, I think has the more manageable schedule because they get Ohio State at home. They don't play Penn State, and they play at Wisconsin, at Michigan, but they don't play USC. So that's part of the reason I have Oregon winning the regular season because their schedule. Because I can see them both. I can see Oregon going 12-0 and not being as good as we think they are. You know what I mean? Like not being as good as their record shows because of their schedule. I mean, what other team do you look at and say, boy, that team's just got the talent, athleticism that Oregon has? They don't play USC. They don't play Penn State. Those are the only other 2 teams in the league that I could say match up athletically with with Oregon outside of Ohio State. I don't think Michigan matches up athletically with Oregon. They can match up with them in the trenches.
Right.
You can't match up with them athletically, and that's the concern. Because to your point, like the Dylan Gabriel, Bo Nix thing, like we definitely disagree on that, but there's no disagreement on Dylan Gabriel versus whoever the quarterback in Michigan is going to be.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
That's not even a debate. I mean, it's not even close. But when you're sitting here on June 27th and you don't know who your quarterback's going to be, like no clue who your quarterback is going to be, that's a problem.
Come on, Notre Dame doesn't know who their quarterback's going to be.
Yes, they do. Notre Dame's known who their quarterback's going to be every year since 2018. Like, I don't care what stories are being written about quarterback battles. It's Riley Leonard. I mean, come
just
on.
Fun.
Just like last year, it was going to be Sam Hartman. And the year before that, it was going to be like, you remember spring of 2023 and everybody's like, oh, there's a quarterback battle. And what we kept saying, guys, it's going to be Sam Hartman.
No, there's not.
Like, come on. Is it going to be Jack Cohn or Tyler? Guys.
Right.
It's going to be Jack Cohn. Can we not do this? Can we not do this year? But yeah, it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see how those are. And I actually think stretches like that are good for Ohio State, to be honest with you. I think Ohio State's problem in the postseason in past years, Vince, is they just don't get challenged.
Yeah.
They were so much better than the rest of the league. They just didn't get challenged. I think the league's gotten better. And the fact that they've got to play Iowa, at Oregon, Nebraska, and at Penn State in the middle of the year and then end with Michigan, they're going to be tested.
Yeah.
And it's going to be good for them. That's going to be good for them, in my opinion. We're going to learn a lot more. We're going to know for sure if Ohio State's that good when we get to the postseason this year.
Yeah. All right. You want to do some of our kind of superlatives for the Big Ten?
Let's do it.
All right. So who is your sleeper team? You don't know mine. We're venturing into an area where we don't know what each other picked.
I've got Nebraska, and
okay.
I would be more confident in that if their schedule was a little bit nicer to them. Their schedule's not super nice to them, but I look at Nebraska. They've got a lot of ingredients that I look for in a team that is going to be a sleeper team. They've got good athletes on the perimeter. They got Jamal Banks. Remember we talked about him, the kid from Wake Forest that transferred in. They've got three starting offensive linemen coming back. They've got experience coming back at running back. They've got a 5-star freshman quarterback, which is my biggest concern, actually, is a freshman quarterback. But their D-line returns a lot, and there's some really good players. Their secondary returns a lot. And I think Mac Rule's a heck of a football coach. The problem is they got to play at Purdue, at Indiana, at Ohio State, at USC, at Iowa, and then they get Wisconsin, UCLA, Rutgers, and Illinois at home. That's not an easy schedule. But I really like this Nebraska football team. And the thing that does work for them schedule-wise, even though I think overall their schedule is a little challenging, the thing that works for them, though, is it starts off with a lot of winnable games. Their first 4 at home, UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, and Illinois. Then they go to Purdue. I mean, I have that as a potential loss for them because I like Purdue's roster coming back and I like Hudson Card. But Nebraska still has the better roster. If they can win that game, then they get Rutgers at home the next week. And then at Indiana, I had a buddy of mine text me today, and he was like, dude, like Nebraska could be 7-0 before they go play Ohio State. And I'm like, I don't think that they will be, but it's very possible. Very possible. And then, of course, the end from there, it's a lot tougher. It's at Ohio State, home against UCLA, at USC, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa. It's not an easy finish.
Yeah.
But it's set up for them. And that's the thing with a team like Nebraska, Vince. They choked away so many games last year that they should have won. Like, they were a very good 5-7 team last year, in my opinion. Just as far as like being, close in some of those games. They flat out should have beat Minnesota last year. I mean, just flat out should have beat Minnesota last year to start the season off. Got smacked pretty good by Colorado, got smacked pretty good by Michigan, should have beat Michigan State, should have beat Maryland, should have beat Wisconsin, should have beat Iowa. I mean, their last 4 losses, Vince, they finished the year with 4 straight losses. They lost by 3, 3, 7, and 3. And then their first loss of the season was by 3. Those are teams that I always look at and say, if that team can schedule well early and get some momentum where they gain confidence, those 3-point losses turn into 3-point wins. Those 7-point losses turn into 7-point wins. And that's kind of how I feel about Nebraska now that they're going into year 2 of Matt Rule's tenure. Because whatever you feel about Matt Rule, the one thing that guy has done, that guy can rebuild football programs.
Yeah. Oh, he's proven that.
Yeah. And so I really like Nebraska as a potential sleeper team. I have them 7th right now. I could see them finishing higher than that. Definitely could see them finishing higher than that. They're a team I like. It just comes down to the reason I don't have them higher than 7th, Vince, is I just have a hard time really projecting them to be a lot better than 7th with a true freshman. I don't care if he's a 5-star. He's a true freshman.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a concern for me.
So my sleeper team is a team that I've got ranked in like the lower 3rd, who I think could be in the middle 3rd. I'm not saying that they're going to contend for the championship or anything like that. It's a team that I think there are very low expectations because it's year 1 of the coaching staff. But I think they've got some pieces in place, but they have a brutal schedule in the middle. And that team is Michigan State. Now, granted, they had to turn over almost the entire roster. They're not necessarily built to, make a run or anything like that. I think that Jonathan Smith is a really good offensive mind. He's bringing his quarterback that he had at Oregon State over. I think this kid has got the potential to be a pretty good dual threat quarterback in the Big Ten. Big Ten doesn't know a whole lot about him. I think that could work to their benefit. I like the beginning of the schedule. I like the end of the schedule. So they open with a home game against FAU. They go to Maryland. They got Prairie View A&M, and then they're at Boston College. Okay. Their last 4 games of the season, they're home against Indiana, at Illinois, home against Purdue, home against Rutgers. I like those 8 games for them. The problem is the middle 4 games where they host Ohio State, they have to go out to Oregon, they host Iowa, and they're at Michigan. That's a brutal 4-game stretch, okay? Now, this is a team that was 4-8 last year, okay? Obviously, they turned over their coaching staff. They had off-the-field issues. I mean, it's
4-8 and through utter turmoil.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
It was crazy.
Complete craziness. And they won 4 games. With this schedule, even with the brutalness of the middle, I think this is a bowl team. I think this is a team that could reach a bowl game. I do. And if they do that, I think, they're better than number 12, as far as in the Big Ten. I think they could get up into single digits, maybe 8, 9 in that neighborhood. And that would be massive for Michigan State this year, in my opinion. So I like them to be better than they're projected to be. Like I said, the schedule is nice beginning and end. The middle part, they're going to have to navigate that. They could very easily go 0-4 in the middle, right? But if they go 6-2 with everything else, you're a bowl team, just like that. And I think that they're a 7-ish win team, which is obviously a huge improvement over last year. And I think that's a great launching point for Jonathan Smith and what he wants to do at Michigan State. So they're my sleeper team.
I have Michigan State 9th. So I completely agree with you that they could sneak into that. And here's the key, though, Vince. The Maryland to BC games are key. They got to win. They got to win 100%. One of those two. Got to win one of those two. Because to your point, if they win one of those two and they go 3-1, let's just say they lose the next 4, which I think they'll win one. I think between Iowa, they'll have a shot to beat Iowa. But let's say they lose all 4. Now all of a sudden they're 3-5. Okay, well, Indiana at home, win. Purdue at home, win. Rutgers at home, win, and at Illinois, it's a potential. I mean, so to your point there, that's a potential for a 6-6 season. But the 3-1 start minimum is the key.
Yes, agreed.
It's absolutely the key for a host of reasons. Number one is it sets them up to potentially have even 6 wins on the schedule. But the two thing is this is a team that is in turmoil. They have a lot of new faces.
Yes,
there's some guys that are gone. I love Aiden Childs at quarterback. I love Jonathan Smith as a football coach, but that's a program that needs a culture change. And if you come out losing early, it's harder to get the buy-in. But if you come out and those kids find success, they're going to be like, hey, listen, maybe no coach knows what he's talking about. And then that'll help them better sustain that middle part of the season.
Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Michigan State, I think, has the best special teams unit in the Big Ten.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah.
That's not
any other potential sleepers for you, Vince, based on kind of where you have them? Minnesota's a team that I have ranked low that I think has a roster that I like. I do. I like the roster. I think they could finish higher than I have them. I just think their schedule's really tough. They're one that I could see. And their season, again, hinges on how they start. They get North Carolina at home and then 2 winnable games and then Iowa at home. If they can win those 2 games, and all of a sudden they're looking at a pretty good season.
Sure.
But after that, it's at Michigan, home against USC, at UCLA, home against Maryland, at Illinois, at Rutgers, home against Penn State, at Wisconsin. Yeah, they're a team that I think could be better than I think that they are going to be.
Let me see if I can find
because they're going to be way better at quarterback this year, and that's kind of my issue for Rutgers is because Rutgers quarterback is going to be the kid that was at Minnesota last year, who's not very good. But I have them 12th. Athlon has them 12th. I could see them being better than their record, than their projection.
Yeah, Rutgers was going to be the team. I like Greg Schiano. I like what he does. I mean, for whatever reason, he just found his niche up there in Piscataway. But, I mean, I think he could coach them to a couple of wins that maybe they weren't supposed to win, kind of a deal. I've got them at 10, which, they could get into the single digits. You know what I mean? And so I think they have a chance. But
I have them at 11, so we're close. And I would say my reason for having them 11 is, again, schedule. They play at Nebraska, at UCLA, at Maryland, at Michigan State.
Right.
That can be tough. But, yes, Rutgers is another team. I watched their quarterback stink it up in the Big Ten last year when he was at Minnesota.
That's fair. And he's in the same league, so there you go.
Exactly. And this is what we were talking about yesterday. Like, if I'm Rutgers, I'm going to try to break every rule I can to try to get Steve Angeli to transfer from Notre Dame and come play for us at Rutgers.
It'd be a difference maker.
Right now, they're go from 11 to 8 or 7, in my opinion, just right like that. Because they got a really good running back. really good O-line, some decent skill players on the outside, and then if Greg Schiano's always going to have good defenses. So they just can't figure out the quarterback position. That's the big problem. They just can't figure that part of it out.
So who do you have that you think is overrated? Somebody that's ranked a little bit higher than you think they're actually going to finish. And there's a couple of teams I think that could fall into this category. I've got two in my head. I've got one written down. So
go for it.
I mean, logically, I think this is an accurate pick, but I really enjoy saying it as well. And it's Michigan. Mm-hmm. I've got them 5th, I was on the fence between them and USC 4th and 5th, which one would be where. I ended up going with USC above Michigan. Partly I did that. Again, I pick a lot of this stuff with my gut. Partly that is because I want USC to be better, because then that in turn makes Notre Dame's win over USC that much better, that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I ended up doing it. And I don't mind putting Michigan, lower, but a lot of publications have them 3rd.
I mean, the two I'm looking at here, Athlon and Lindy's both have them 3rd.
Right. Which I think is way too high.
Oh, here's my Phil Steele. Let me see where he has them this year. I don't know where he has them this year. Let me see where he's got the old Wolverines in his preseason. He's got them 4th.
Okay.
I think that's the best case scenario for Penn State, for Michigan. Right. I do. I think 4th is best case scenario.
Yeah, there's too many question marks offensively, number one. I think they're going to have a good defense. I don't know if they're going to be an elite defense that's going to help them win the games that they're going to need to win to be 3rd or 4th in the league. I just
They can't beat Iowa. That's the thing, because their schedule's too hard.
Exactly.
Their schedule's too hard. They say, well, Iowa's one with worse offenses. Yeah, but Iowa didn't have to play Texas, and USC and Washington on the road and Oregon and at Ohio State. Like, it's just, I think I'm with you on Michigan. I have Michigan, I think 5th or 6th in the league. 6th in the league.
You have them 6th. I have them higher than you. Yeah.
So I could see them. And look, I mean, Fresno's not going to be a pushover in the opener, Vince.
You're not wrong.
With you got a brand new starting offensive line. Now, look, some of those guys have played a decent amount of football. Miles Hinton's played a lot of football, and there's some talented kids there. I get all that. But you're going to have a brand new quarterback, whether it's Alex Orji or Jack Tuttle. Neither are very good, in my opinion, to be honest with you. Your receiving core is solid, but it's not great. And I don't know that Donovan Edwards can be the guy. He was a great role player behind Blake Corum. He'd come in, be that juice off the bench. He had a great game against Ohio State, but he was very mediocre last year for a big chunk of the season, especially when Blake Corum was out, in my opinion. I could be maybe grading him a little too harshly, but guy averaged 4.2 yards per carry last year, Vince. And you're going to lose all 5 of those starters? And a big chunk of that success came in the bowl game. He had 6, or the championship game. He had 6 carries for 104 yards. He had that long run early in the game, but I mean, he had a lot of very mediocre games last year. And I'm like, can he really carry the load? I don't know that he is that guy. I really don't know that he's that guy. I mean, 2022 version of Donovan Edwards was pretty flipping good. I just don't know if he's that guy.
Right.
I just, on a full-time basis. So, yeah, we'll see.
So who do you got? Was that yours as well, or do you have
Michigan was mine?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, because you look at the rest of them. I mean, I'm kind of in line with a lot of. I think Wisconsin's the other one. That's my other team.
A lot of people are high on Wisconsin.
Yeah. 7th and 8th is where most people have them. I have them 13th or 14th.
Where you got them down there.
I've got them 13th.
13th. Yep.
I'm just not high on that football team.
Yeah,
I'm not. I don't see I don't see it. I don't like the transition from what they were to an air raid. I just think that was a mistake.
That's a tough transition from what they were, man. That's a multi-year transition, because you got to get a couple of recruiting classes in there, and maybe it's a little easier with the portal. But
I mean, how many big-time receivers are beating down the door trying to get over to Wisconsin?
Yeah, 100%.
With
no track record, you're going to have to sell them a bill of goods,
and without a ton of NIL money buying players. I mean, that's the hard part. And what's confusing too is there was just no need to go that route. I know Phil Longo put up numbers at North Carolina, but he always had when he had better rosters than just about everybody else in the league.
Right.
But even then, it's like they would have those choke games where they just, couldn't run the ball against good teams, and they got worse every year. He was at North Carolina on offense. His teams got more used to what he was doing. But North Carolina had athletes, quarterback, and Sam. I mean, his two quarterbacks at UNC were Sam Howell and Drake May.
Right. Both top NFL draft picks.
He had Javonte Williams and Michael Carter at running back.
Right.
He had Josh Downs.
Because he had 2,000-yard rushers at one point, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, his receiving core was really good back then when he was there too. I mean, like I mentioned, Josh Downs and Antoine Green in 2022. He had Josh Downs in 2021 as well. In 2020, he had De'Ami Brown, Daz Newsome, Coffrey Brown. Then, of course, your two running backs were really good coming out of the backfield. So, I mean, he had legit athletes there. He didn't inherit those kind of athletes at Wisconsin.
Right.
And I just don't see them. I just don't see them there. I don't like that fit. Mm-hmm. And he didn't do that before. I mean, he had Mike Denbrock as his OC before, and Gino Guidugli. Those are not air raid guys. They won a lot of games. Like, I don't know why you went away from what you did, and you hired a guy that North Carolina was glad to get rid of. Like, Drake May probably doesn't come back to North Carolina last year if Phil Longo's still the OC. Like, that's the guy you want to hand your offense over to. I think that was a bad hire.
In a rebuilding situation where the roster does not meet what you want to do offensively.
Anywhere close.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Anywhere close. So I'm not high on Wisconsin. I think they're going to take big step back. Step back this season.
I'd be okay with that. I'm just not a fan of the coach, so
yeah,
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I mean, that has nothing to do with why I would pick them to be where they are.
Because I don't like Ryan Day either, and I got them winning the Big Ten. So.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a happy accident.
Yeah.
Okay, hot seat. Now I mentioned this earlier that there's a lot of programs that are in the first, second, or third year of their head coach. And so that eliminates a ton of teams from the hot seat conversation. Yeah. But I did find one that, again, made my heart a little happy to put him on the hot seat. And with the schedule and some other things and the fact that, you know what, I'm not sure that his heart is into being there anymore based on some off-season stuff. So I'm going to say PJ Fleck is on the hot seat.
What off-season things are you referring to?
Well, I know he wanted the job at UCLA. Didn't get it. And if you're looking, it's kind of that whole, in a relationship thing. Like, if you're actively looking, you don't really want to be here anymore. Like that. And maybe that's simplified, Yeah. But that's just the way I look at it, man. Like, if you're actively interviewing and looking at another job, then do you really want to be with us anymore? And that might make it easier to cut ties with him if they don't have a good year.
Yeah. Well, and they didn't have a good year last year, so that would factor into it. That's a good one, Vince, because to your point, Michigan's coach is not going to be on the hot seat. This is his first year.
Right.
No matter how much fans cry about it, Ryan Day and Dan Lanning are not going to be on the hot seat.
Correct.
Lincoln Riley, maybe. Matt Rule's is not eligible for that. He's new. You've got Jed Fish is in year one. Jonathan Smith is in year one. Deshaun Foster's in year one. Kurt Signetti's in year one. Ryan Walters is in year two. David Braun's going in his first full year. I mean, so there's half the league right there. It's just not even an option.
Right.
So there's a couple. I thought about Kirk Ferentz at Iowa.
Okay.
Not so much being on the hot seat per se, but just there's been a lot of things that have happened. Some of it righteous, or justified for people to be upset. Some of it not. Some of it I thought was BS. Yeah. The stuff with his kid, that's a legitimate reason to be upset. You let your program, but again, they also played in the Big Ten title game.
It's true.
But I think it's not hot seat per se, but just more so is the time.
Is it time to pass the torch? Yeah.
Yeah. Is it time? But he's still winning. That's the thing. And I would like to see him go out on his own terms. But PJ Fleck's a really good one, Vince. He's a really good one. Mine is Brett Bielema.
Okay.
Because, he was doing some good things there. And then all of a sudden, they kind of took a big step back last year. A big step back last year. And he hasn't been able to really figure things out offensively. And they went 5-7 last year. And he's going into his fourth year.
Okay.
And he's now had two losing seasons in 3 years. And so you're going to look at your schedule and it's like, okay, you don't play Ohio State. You get Michigan at home. You play at Penn State. You don't get Oregon. You don't get USC. You don't get Washington. Your schedule's set up pretty well for you supposedly to go out there and have a jump. If they don't have an improvement this year, I think his seat gets like if they're 6-6 or worse, I think his seat gets real hot. I do.
It's it's funny that you mentioned them because I was talking to a fan of Illinois, I want to say, and they were talking about him and how he didn't respect the state of Illinois from a recruiting standpoint. And he's kind of changed his tune and he's like more focused on Illinois and they seem to be happy about that. And I was like, well,
Illinois, Illinois is that fan base that they have a far inflated view of how good their state talent is in football.
Fair enough. If
the Illinois basketball coach is ignoring Illinois, that's a problem. But there's not a ton of football talent in Illinois, and most of the good talent's going to go to Michigan, Ohio State, or Notre Dame, if I'm being honest about it. Sure. Now, are there guys that you maybe should focus on more? Sure. But look, the reality is he knows what you and I both know, which is you're not going to win a Big Ten title because your roster's 80% Illinois players.
That's facts. Yeah.
You're get those guys. Definitely get those guys. But
sure.
You also have to still go out of state. So, yeah, you've got to do both. You've got to do both. But that's the point being, however, Vince, to your point, is that's how you alienate your fan base.
Right.
And your boosters and your supporters. And if you don't, if you're going to do that, like Urban Meyer pissed a lot of Ohio State fans off early on in his tenure because he went national, out of state a lot more.
Yeah.
They got over it real quick when he started winning. Right? I mean, that's, okay, cool. We're winning. But you do that and then lose, and that's how you get in trouble.
Right.
But there's a couple other coaches. Mike Loxley is another one, Vince, that I look at, and I'm saying I think he might be on the hot seat a little bit this year because there's a lot of thought that they needed to be better. He's a guy that I think a bad year could put him on the hot seat, although I don't have him on there now. But they've won bowl games 3 years in a row. I look at their team coming back, and I look at their schedule, Vince, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
They play Michigan State at home in the week 2. Then they're at Virginia, at Indiana, home against Northwestern, home against USC, at Minnesota, at Oregon, home against Rutgers, home against Iowa, at Penn State. There's a lot of games they could win in there, but there's also a lot of games they could lose. I mean, it could go back and forth. Can they beat Iowa at home? Sure they can. Will they? Can they beat Rutgers at home? Sure they can. Will they? They're going to lose to Oregon on the road. They're going to lose to Penn State on the road. Can they beat Penn State at home or USC at home? I don't think so. Can they go on the road and beat Indiana? Maybe. It's not a gimme. Can they beat Michigan State at home? Should. It's not a gimme.
Yeah.
So he could end up getting put on the hot seat, but I don't think he's there now. And that's why I ended up leaving him off the list. But like I said, there aren't a lot of good options.
Right. It was amazing to me how many teams are early in the tenure of the staff.
Now, there's a lot of coaches, Vince, and this is the Loxley thing. There's a lot of coaches in the league that if they struggle, like PJ Fleck to me is not on the hot seat right now. Like to your point, but that's as close as you're going to get with where the Big Ten is right now.
Right.
What I think is unique about the Big Ten is I don't know that there's a lot of I think there's a lot of people kind of they're just done with his act because it's cute. Like it's cute when it's like. There's this skit, or not a skit, but a scene from Major League 2 where remember that Jack Parkman, he would do that little shimmy at the plate. And when he played for the Indians, Bob Uecker's like, that's the thing that drives all the women in Cleveland crazy. And then when he's on the White Sox, like that's the one that makes all the women in Cleveland want to puke.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's cute when you're winning. Yeah. Oh, look, he sprints 100 yards for no reason whatsoever to coming out of the tunnel.
Wears a shirt and tie, and he's rowing the boat.
Like it's all, like what I don't know what rowing the boat has to do with gophers or whatever. Like, don't they chew on the wood and the paddles and whatever? It's just dumb. But it's all about him. Yeah. It's all about PJ. And this is why I never wanted him anywhere close to Notre Dame. A, he's an overrated coach. B, he's a self-promoter. Pure, simple self-promoter and a guy who just morally I just dislike in every way possible. Like everything that I despise, he is. You know what I mean? Like I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but that shtick gets real old when you start losing and when your offense is boring because you're an offensive guy. And how's he going to do now that Joe Rossi's gone? Right? Because last year the defense was not good, but before that defense carried that team for a while. And so, and then you look at their schedule, Vince. So I could see him maybe not being on the hot seat when the season starts, but by the end of it, he could absolutely be on the hot seat. Because like, again, North Carolina at home, is it a given they're going to beat North Carolina? 3 weeks later, they can play Iowa at home. Is it a given? Then they got to play at Michigan, home against USC. Vince, it's not out of the question that they start the season 2-5.
Yeah.
Because they play USC at home and then go to UCLA.
And that seat will be on fire at that point.
Fire.
If they're 2-5, it will be on fire. And you add into the fact that he was trying to interview other places, like that doesn't help the situation.
And then his last 4 games are at Illinois, at Rutgers, home against Penn State, at Wisconsin. They're going to probably lose at least 3 of their last 4 games in the regular season, in my opinion.
That's not a great way to finish.
So he may not be on there now. And that's how I feel about Mike Loxley.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about Bielema. Not on the hot seat now, but could be like if Ryan Walters, if that team collapses again, is he start to get the Ty Willingham treatment where you realize really early on that he's not the guy? Or can he show progress? I mean, there's a lot of that type of stuff. Same with David Braun. I mean, he's not going to be in the hot seat. He's in his first full year. And he got that job because how good. But if they collapse, like they could, I mean, their schedule, Vince, is just ridiculous. This is their conference schedule: at Washington, home against Indiana, at Maryland, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa, at Purdue, neutral field against Ohio State, at Michigan, neutral field against Illinois. Their last 6 of their last 7 games are away from home. Like they could go 3-9 and all of a sudden the honeymoon's over. Is he on the hot seat?
Yeah.
No, but is there starting to be some immediate doubts? Like, do we make the right decision? Sure. And that's why I say with like Ryan Walters, it's not that I don't think Ryan Walters is a good coach. I don't know that we're got a chance to see it yet because the schedules that they're giving him are just like, you're not doing that guy any favors whatsoever with the schedule you're giving him. So I could see a lot of those coaches getting on the hot seat when it's all said and done, even if they're not necessarily there now, which is interesting. But I like yours. I think that I hope that one turns out to be true.
I know you do. I knew you'd like it. I knew that when I picked it.
Yeah, you know how much I like that guy.
But I still believe that it's true.
Right. You're not just saying that to get me rolling, but it's
right.
Yeah.
But it was just a bonus. It was an added bonus.
Because you knew that you're just going to here comes the hanging curve. Knock it out of the park.
And yeah, the whole the fact that he brought his row the boat thing from Central Michigan to Minnesota made 0 sense.
Western.
Was he at Western? You're right. He was a Bronco. You are absolutely correct. It was a Western, but like totally made sense. Like, let's bring this to anyway.
What was he like, Vince?
I think I'd be cutting me out now.
Yeah.
All right. Top player.
Can I say something real quick? Because somebody in the chat just said something that talking about he got a raise. Like, guys, coaches getting raises doesn't matter.
Doesn't mean anything.
And sometimes those raises come with, okay, we're going to pay you more per year, but we're going to lower your buyout.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so pay raises mean nothing. Not at a place like that. Like, Jimbo Fisher, people talking about Brian Kelly's not getting fired. Like, I think Insured by Big, who's our resident LSU fan, had mentioned something yesterday. Like, Brian Kelly's owed so much money, he's going to pretty much kind of get the Jimbo Fisher treatment if they take a step back. That's to say, like, my friends of mine that are like, he's going to be out after 3 or 4 years. I'm like, the only way Brian Kelly's gone after 3 or 4 years is if they utterly collapse, like 2016 utter collapse, or B, he leaves. Yeah, they're not going to fire him for going 9-3 every year. There's no way because they can't afford it.
At least not early in the contract.
Afford it.
Yeah,
Tulane has an endowment twice as big as LSU's.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow. Okay, that's very interesting. Never would have thought that in a million years. The green wave, bringing it. Green as in money, apparently. Mm-hmm. All right, so your top player in the conference. I know you're going to love mine. And
okay, I'm. Let's do it.
Well, I have Dylan Gabriel as the MVP.
I mean, you think he's better than Bo Nix, who's the number 12 overall draft pick last year.
Got it.
Stick with it. Threw for 4,500 yards and put up crazy numbers. So sure, yeah,
sticking with it. I'm going down with the ship on this one. So
can you just dive into, like, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just
it's more of a. I think it could be a very good fit at Oregon. I think he's going to put up a lot of numbers at Oregon, and I think that's going to help. I don't know
what kind of numbers are you projecting.
Player. I don't know.
I get what you're saying. Player. I mean, you can say, hey, look, nobody at Alabama put up better numbers than what Mac Jones did a couple years ago, but that doesn't mean he's the best quarterback they ever had.
Right.
or that he was better than Tua or better than Bryce Young. He just played on a better team, and he was perfect for that system. So I understand that.
Yeah.
So what kind of numbers do you think he's going to put up this year?
I am terrible at projecting numbers because I always overdo it.
Okay.
But I think he'll be pushing. I think he could potentially be pushing the 3,500, 4,000 yard mark in passing. I do.
Okay.
I don't think he's going to beat Bo Nix numbers. I don't. But
then how's he going to be better if you just think he's going to be like more?
I was giving you a hard time on that. I was giving you a hard time on that one. I like Bo Nix a lot.
But you still think Dylan Gabriel is better, though?
I think he is. I don't think he's better. No,
because Bo Nix passed for 4,500 yards last year,
right.
45 touchdowns and 3 picks.
Yeah, I like Bo Nix way more than I like Gabriel. Okay, but I think that
are you sure you're not just backing off that because you're like,
no, I'm not. I've always liked Bo Nix, even when he was at Auburn. Even when he was at Auburn, I liked.
I thought he got a bad. I used to debate this with the other guys, and they're like, "Oh, Bo Nix stinks." I'm like, "No,
no. I was a big fan of Bo Nix when he was at Auburn. I think that Gabriel is going to be. He's going to fit the system really well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think Dan Lanning has a good thing going, and they're just going to plug him in.
And he'll have good weapons.
And keep going.
He'll have good weapons. Exactly. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I like Dylan Gabriel as a quarterback in that system. I think he's a little bit overrated and overhyped, in my opinion, nationally. Like people talking about top 5 candidate for the Heisman, maybe. But I don't think he repeats Bo Nix's numbers from last year. I don't think he'll really come close to that. But get it? You see Stiers in there in the chat.
No, doesn't he have a show to prep for?
I just don't. I think they're going to rely a little bit more on the run this year. I think I could be wrong on that, but he's going to. I mean, getting Evan Stewart, and they've got the what's the other receiver's name coming back? I think it's Johnson. But they're going to have a really talented group of receivers, good running backs, good O-line, defense going to be good. I mean, it's going to be good. I think he's a good player, and if he gets hurt, they've got Dante Moore. That's the dynamic that I find very interesting. Is do they stick by Dylan Gabriel if he has a rough game, or do they immediately go to Dante? Right. And then how much do they have Dylan looking over his shoulder? Because that's going to be fascinating as well. But now he's a good quarterback. So he's your player of the year.
Yep.
You're going with him. Okay.
Going all in.
The issue that I have, Vince, is because it is so driven. These awards tend to be so driven by quarterbacks. But, look, I think the player of the year to me is going to be either Emeka Egbuka, who I think could have a big year at receiver, or my dark horse player of the year is Travion Henderson. If Travion's healthy, I think Travion's going to have a really big year. Really big year. Everybody's talking about Quinshon Judkins and all that. And maybe they split carries a little bit this year. But man, I think that it's going to be him. Now, that's the thing that could help Gabriel is he's going to have numbers. They're going to be the regular season champs, according to both of us. Or no, according to me.
I've got him being the Big Ten champs, but not the regular season.
You have him basically being 11-1.
Yes.
And he will put up numbers. Like you said, if Gabriel throws for 4,000 yards and 35-plus touchdowns, he's probably going to be the league MVP. I just think he'll be less than that. And because the other thing, he's got to prove he can stay healthy for 12 games. And then I don't know what it is, man. I just really like Travion Henderson if he's healthy. I really do. And if he gets back to being the guy he was as a freshman, then I think he's gonna have a really big breakout year. I do. Now, here's a dark horse candidate for me, Vince, is Nick Singleton at Penn State. Like I could see him kind of snapping back out of last year and having a breakout year. And here's how I say dark horse. The Ohio State running backs kind of eat each other up a little bit from a MVP standpoint because they're splitting carries. Gabriel maybe gets knocked out of a couple games, so he doesn't quite have the numbers. And then who's there to kind of pick up the pieces? It's him. So he's one of my dark horse candidates. And then my other dark horse candidate is if USC is legitimately battling for the number 3 spot, Zechariah Branch is going to be a monster as a receiver and as a returner. And I could see him being in that conversation as well. So those are the guys that are in my mind when I think about the potential league candidates. That's where I'm at.
Very nice. I like it. So I think that's all we have for the Big Ten. Am I missing anything?
No, man.
Oh, we got a super chat. What's up? Chief Brody, thanks for the super chat. Bing, bang, boom, baby. What's good, V and B? Somebody listens to the podcast.
He put that at the very beginning of the show. Yeah.
Somebody listens to the podcast because that is from my commercial cut. So
on the prize picks.
Prize picks, yeah. Bing, bang, boom, baby.
So, Vince, I'm going to ask you this, man.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
What is the one Big Ten game you're most looking forward to watching this year?
Oh, man. Okay, so Big Ten obviously has to have both. Yeah, both participants need to be Big Ten people.
Game. What's the biggest conference game you're looking forward to watching? Doesn't have to mean it's the biggest.
Right.
What's the one you're most looking forward to watching this year?
I know there was a list.
I mean, you got Ohio State at Oregon. You got Ohio State at Penn
State. Here we go. Here's the list I was looking for. Okay. I am looking most forward to, because
that's a tough one.
It is. Well, I want to make sure I look at all of them before I say. Look, it's going to be Ohio State, Oregon. That's the one, because that's going to be for the supremacy of the conference. So, and I guess people are agreeing with me over there, or I'm agreeing with them. I'm not sure, but I was looking at the magazine that has all the games listed.
That's going to be the biggest game of the Big Ten for sure.
Yes,
that's going to be a big game. Yeah,
I mean. Look, from a Notre Dame perspective, I am actually very interested to see USC Michigan.
That's mine.
Okay, there you go.
And not from a Notre Dame standpoint, Vince, but to me, that game in I think it's week 3. I don't think there's
September 21st.
Okay, then it's week 3. That game to me, Vince, is the one that's going to tell us about those two teams. That's the game that's going to be the most, okay, who are these teams of the year? It really could. And then another one is Ohio State at Penn State is a fascinating game for me. Like, it really is, because
that's in November.
Let's say Ohio State loses to Oregon. You go on the road and you're playing Penn State a couple weeks later, and all of a sudden it's like, that's a big game. Like, you got a potential berth to the Big Ten title game. Like, we all talk about the rematch, because what's the conversation going to be about coming out of that Oregon-Ohio State game? Rematch. And if Ohio State wins, I'm pretty confident it will be a rematch. If Ohio State loses, you look at, because like right now I have Ohio State losing and still winning it. So, but that's why I say that Penn State game right now, I have that chalked up as a win for Ohio State. But this is it for Penn State. Like, and if you look at it, Vince, you know what happens to to James Franklin? Like, the new league puts a lot more on the line for him, because now he's only got you can't beat Michigan and you can't beat Ohio State. Now he's got to say, well, can you beat USC?
Yeah.
Can you beat Oregon? Because that Penn State, they're going to be coming off of a stretch of at USC and at Wisconsin. They could have their backs up against the wall to where they're fighting for their playoff life. You know what I mean? Like, that could end up, because they could both be coming off of recent losses where the loser of that game is in a really tough spot for the remainder of the year. Because if Ohio State loses that game, now you go into Michigan, last game of the year, your playoff life is on the line.
It's interesting that you say that, because I had the exact opposite feeling as I was kind of doing my research for the Big Ten and everything. It was that, wow, James Franklin just got a break having the 12-team playoff, because now he's got an opportunity to be like, hey, we keep making the playoff. I don't know what you guys are upset about, but he does have more competition within his own league, and so that kind of balances it out. But when I saw the stat that they would have been in 6 of the last 8 years or whatever it happens to be, but they always lose to Michigan and Ohio State, it feels like, but they still would get in with 2 losses. You know what I mean? But they would be in the bottom half of that playoff, but he could just be like, hey, we're always in the playoff. What's wrong? What don't you like?
Here's the difference, though. The difference is that in the past, outside of Ohio State and occasionally Michigan, nobody else in the Big Ten was close to having the talent that Penn State would have. That's not true now, because now you've got USC to deal with, and you've got to go to USC. You've got Oregon to deal with. Now, this year they don't play Oregon, but I think they do next year. So you look at it and say, you don't play Oregon and you don't play Michigan. Now there's no excuse to not be a playoff team.
Yeah, right.
But, like I said, that West Virginia road game at USC, at Wisconsin. I mean, that's not an easy game. But if they, it's going to be interesting. At Minnesota, we'll see how that one goes. But that's why I say, like, for both of those teams, that game is going to be huge. And Ohio State's dominated that series. I mean, they've won 7 straight. But, Vince, let's look at the 7 games since Penn State last won in 2016. But let's look at the games since then. 2017, 1-point Ohio State win. 2018, 1-point Ohio State win. 2019, 11-point Ohio State win. 2020, 13-point Ohio State win. 2021, 9-point Ohio State win. 2022, 13-point Ohio State win. 2023, 8-point Ohio State win. So it's not like Ohio State's just blowing the socks off of Penn State. Like, they've at least had some competitive games. Like, early on, I mean, I think their first 2 games, they just got blown out. But they haven't necessarily destroyed them. So, again, I have it as an Ohio State win, but it's going to be fascinating either way. The result either way is going to have have some major ramifications. And some in the chat said, Ohio State, James Franklin in the big game, I'm taking Ohio State. Me too. But that's
Right.
kind of my thing is, like, what if Ohio State loses to Oregon? Now, all of a sudden, there's a lot
That's
of
a
pressure on that
huge
Penn State game.
Yeah, right.
What
And
if,
it's on the road.
Yeah. What if Penn State has a loss to USC and Wisconsin? Or, you know what I mean? Now, all of a sudden, then you're talking about that fight for their playoff life, or being a consistent playoff team. But now, all of a sudden, they're fighting for their playoff lives going into Columbus.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, with the team from Columbus coming to see them
in the beginning of November. Like, that's still fair. Not early, but you're you want to be making the good impressions in November.
Yeah. So it's that game to me is very interesting. So obviously USC Michigan's going to be big for the reasons I mentioned, but that Ohio State Penn State game is going to be very, very telling. Very telling, and could have some. And now all of a sudden, let's say Penn State goes 9-3 and misses the playoff. Now all of a sudden that heat, that seat in old Happy Valley starts warming up a little bit.
Couldn't happen to a better
on James
coach.
Franklin. So, yeah, it's going to be fun. I just wanted to pop that one on you, Vince, because I was looking through it as I was making my comment. Man, there's a lot like Nebraska at USC, Nebraska at Ohio State. You talk about the Oregon at Michigan game. That's going to be a very fascinating game. You talk about Iowa at Ohio State. It's going to be a big game. There's a lot of really big games this year you look at and say, boy, those are going to be some very telling games about how the league's going to shape up.
November 2nd has Oregon at Michigan and Ohio State at Penn State.
Whew.
Those are 2 pretty big games. I mean,
yeah,
when you're talking about looking for supremacy in the league, those are some pretty big games outside of when Oregon and Ohio State actually play each other.
Yes.
I mean, that's
That's
gonna be
that's really interesting. See who USC plays at Washington that day. That's going to be an interesting game. Iowa and Wisconsin play that day. That's going to be That's going to be a big day in the Big Ten, man. No pun intended.
You know what the best part about that is? Notre Dame's on a bye week. So we're going to be watching a lot of football that day.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So that'll do it for our Big Ten predictions, Vince.
Yes. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us. Really appreciate you doing so. We will pick yet another conference to talk about next Thursday. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was SEC or Big 12, but we're going to go SEC next week.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go SEC next Thursday, so make sure you stick around for that. And tomorrow, folks, it is Friday, the best day of the week, because it is the Friday free-for-all mailbag. Make sure you stick around. The show is driven by you. Get those questions in. We're going to have a lot of fun tomorrow. Really looking forward to it, as I always do on a Friday. And
he genuinely does. Like, just so you all know, that's not Vince like doing an act to hype up the show. He loves the mailbag.
Always have. Like, I've always loved the mailbag. Even when I was doing shows from my classroom at Riley High School, I love Friday.
Teacher's Lounge.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, what I do for IB, okay, people?
Yeah.
But no, tune in tomorrow. We're going to have a lot of fun. 1:00 live. Obviously, hit the podcast as well. And then also, of course, make sure you hit the like, the subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and jump on the boards, folks. Lots of good conversation going on over there. And you never know when breaking news is going to hit. And we'll explain it for you over on the boards. Like, you'll find out about the breaking news, but you're not going to know any details unless you're on the board, okay? So make sure you get on the board. It's the best thing money can buy. So for Bryan, I'm Vince. We will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. See you tomorrow.